Good morning, everyone. This is a meeting of Hertfordshire County Council's Resource and Performance Cabinet Panel held on the 4th of September. I'm the chairman, Ralph Sangster. This is the first cabinet panel to return to formal arrangements since the COVID outbreak in February moved us all on to special measures, so to speak. This is the opportunity for members of the cabinet panel to review some of the issues that are important to the council, and specifically to review some of the issues that have been passed down to it by the council and etc. Richard, you're on screen, so perhaps you could close your camera down. Thank you. I have an announcement to read out. COVID-19 attendance at this meeting. Due to the coronavirus pandemic, the council will be holding this meeting electronically in accordance with the relevant regulations. Members of the public may also attend this meeting in an electronic capacity, and there is a link on the council's website for them to do so. Members of this meeting are asked to keep their microphone and cameras switched off until called to speak, and to switch their microphone and cameras off once they have finished speaking. To indicate a wish to speak, members should request to do so using the meeting chat function. At the end of the debate on each item of business, there will be a vote. Members should vote using the meeting chat function by indicating for, against, or abstain. I will declare the results after each vote. Officers are in attendance, but will keep their cameras and microphones switched off unless called upon to speak. Breaks may be incorporated depending on the length of the meeting as appropriate. I'm just going to ask each of the members of the panel to introduce themselves now, and I'm going to first ask Judy Billing to do so.
My apologies, Ralph. I missed that because my phone rang.
Okay, Judy, do you want to just introduce yourself?
Oh, is that all? Yes. Hello, my name's Judy Billing, and I'm leader of the Labour group on Hertfordshire County Council.
Eric, would you like to similarly?
Yes, I'm Eric Buckmaster and I represent Sawbridgeworth Division.
Francis?
Thanks. I'm Frances Button. I represent Rickmansworth East and Oxley Park, and I also chair the Audit Committee.
Ken?
Good morning, I'm Ken Crofton and I represent the Hertford Rural Division.
Bob?
Hello, I'm Bob Deering. I represent Hertford St Andrews Division, and I'm also the Deputy Chairman of this panel. Thank you.
Adam?
Hello, my name's Adam Mitchell and I represent Broadwater in Stevenage, and I'm also the Deputy of the Pensions Committee.
Sharon?
Sorry, Chair, a little trouble with my mute button there. My name's Sharon Taylor. I am the County Councillor representing the Bedwell Division in Stevenage, which covers Bedwell, Pingreen and Martinswood, and I am the Labour Group spokesperson for Resources and Performance.
Andrew?
Good morning, I'm Andrew Williams. I represent Hemel Hempstead East Division.
Thank you. David? David Williams is substituting for Richard Smith, who is our normal member of the panel.
Good morning, I'm David Williams. I represent Harpenden North East Division and I'm also the leader of the County Council.
Phil?
Hi, good morning. I'm Phil Williams. I'm part of the Great Williams takeover of this group, and I represent Three Rivers Rural.
Tim?
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm the fourth of the Williamses on board here, and basically I represent the Woodside Stanborough area of Watford.
And finally, Paul.
Thank you. I usually get to speak a little bit earlier because so many Williamses here. I'm Paul Jakowski. I'm the Deputy Leader of the Lib Dem group on the County Council, and I represent Hatfield South Division.
Thank you all. I have no apologies for absence, except as I mentioned earlier, there's one substitution, that's David Williams for Richard Smith. Member interests. The members are advised to disclose any pecuniary or disclosable interests on any of the items which are on the agenda this morning. There are two general exemptions which are in the order form, and I'm not intending to read them out. So I'm going to move swiftly on to the minutes of the last meeting, which was some time ago in the 12th of February. I'm not sure if anybody remembers them. Sorry. Paul, yes.
I did raise my hand, and I did put in the chat that I needed to raise a point at that juncture.
Which was the sorry, this is the
disclosable interest.
Okay, sure, sorry, I didn't pick that up.
Okay.
Not many people do.
Yeah. I just wanted to raise that as a member of another authority, a lower tier authority, I wanted to be absolutely sure that I have a dispensation to discuss item 8, because I think I might have a disclosable pecuniary interest given that I have an allowance from that other authority, and that paper is discussing whether that authority should continue to exist.
Okay, an interesting point. I think Quinton is on the line. Could I ask him if he could just confirm otherwise on that point?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Because the interest that's mentioned is remote, it's not directly affected by this, and so I would say that simply the declaration of the interest in this case is sufficient, and it certainly wouldn't preclude Councillor Zakowski from taking part.
Thank you, Sharon. I think you're going to probably ask the same question.
I was just going to say I need to declare it then.
Okay.
Yeah.
Declared.
That's what I was going to say, Chairman, that I need to declare that interest too as the leader of, I'm not going to say lower tier, of the district and borough council.
Okay, and Andrew, I suspect you're the same.
Yeah, I need to also declare then that I'm leader of the Cornwall Borough Council, which is another authority under threat.
Okay. I don't think there are any other twin hatters in the room.
Yeah, I was just going to say I'm a member of Stevenage Borough Council as well, so.
Okay.
And I'd like
and I'm a member of East Harts District Council, Ralph.
Yeah, I'm a member of Watford Borough Council.
Yeah, Eric here, East Harts Council.
East Harts Council.
Phil Williams, Three Rivers Council.
Chris White.
I have asked to speak on this as well.
Sorry, Judy, did I hear you saying you wanted to speak?
Yes, I did. Interestingly, North Hertfordshire District Council had a meeting last week specifically to debate
Judy, someone has got a microphone on, we're getting feedback. Could everybody switch their microphones off, please? Chris, you're still on camera at least, if you got your microphone off, and Ken, you're similarly on camera. Judy, do you want to try again?
I will try again. That's fine.
That's better.
I want to report that some of you may know that last week North Herts District Council had a bizarre full council meeting called by the opposition Conservative group to argue for a unitary Hertfordshire. This, of course, was defeated, but at the time I did suggest that county councillors in that room should be declaring an interest, and we were told specifically that they didn't need to. However, we seem to be getting slightly different advice here, and therefore I declare my interest as an executive member of North Hertfordshire District Council.
Thank you, Judy. If the panel manager could just note that I think that all of the members who are both district and borough councils have declared that they have an interest or a non-pecuniary interest in the subject matter under item 8, and that will cover everybody who is a twin hatter. Okay, everybody happy that I should move on? There are still some hands up. I'm assuming that you've left them up as a consequence of your previous position. I'm just seeing them taking down now. Good. Okay, I think everyone is clear. Stephen, perhaps you should declare at the point at which you wish to speak, Stephen, on item 8. I'm picking that up from the chat box on declarable interests. Okay, we'll move on. Minutes of the last meeting, as I said, held on the 12th of February. There were no part 2 minutes. Are there any issues that the members would like to pick up on those minutes? Can I assume that they're all okay, and I will sign them as it says when I'm next back in County Hall? Okay, public petitions, item 2. We have one public petition, and the respondents are Anna Anderson and Medela Badcock. I think, do we have Anna on the line? I think Anna has joined us. If so, then Anna, you have 3 minutes to present your public petition. I will try and give you a heads up at about 2 minutes 30 seconds so that you know when it's coming up. But at the end of 3 minutes, then we will stop and move on to the next item. So Anna, can you present your petition, and your time will start when you are presenting.
Thank you very much. Apologies, I'm sitting in a car in a car park in the middle of Norfolk at the moment, so hopefully this will work. So firstly, we really appreciate this opportunity to present the Divest Herts petition to this committee. We are speaking on behalf of over 1,000 residents of Hertfordshire who have signed our online petition or postcards, and numerous local groups, asking for the County Council within its pension fund investments to immediately freeze any new investments in fossil fuels, divest from direct ownership and any commingled funds that include fossil fuel public equities and corporate bonds within 5 years. Hertfordshire County Council declared a climate emergency in July 2019 and has recently launched its Sustainable Hertfordshire Strategy 2020, both of which state that the council needs to reduce carbon emissions internally and across its supply chains and its services, thereby including investments such as pension. As I'm sure you're aware, the burning of fossil fuels is the largest contributor to global warming, and unless 80% of fossil fuels are kept in the ground, the world is set to exceed the Paris Agreement commitment to keep global warming under 2 degrees above pre-industrial levels, let alone the aim of keeping below 1.5 levels, so 1.5 degrees Celsius, with effects to be less catastrophic. Mark Carney, the previous governor of the Bank of England, has warned that the vast majority of oil reserves should be considered unburnable if we want to avoid catastrophic climate change, resulting in oil companies' reserves becoming stranded assets. Choosing to use pensions to fight climate change is thought to be 27 times more powerful than quitting flying meat, meat and dairy combined. A growing number of local authorities, universities and other organisations around the world are already committing to divestment from fossil fuels. South Yorkshire pension funds, Oxfordshire and Bristol city councils, Hastings Borough Council and the Environment Agency, to name but a few. Reducing the use of fossil fuels and divesting from companies that financially support their use promotes the reduction in greenhouse carbon dioxide and methane, thereby supporting global warming.
Anna, we seem to have lost you.
Celsius above pre-industrial levels, and also improving health not only through improved air quality, but with
Anna, I'm afraid your broadband reception is has deteriorated significantly before at the point at which you started. So I don't know whether you want to continue or have your surrogate have the opportunity to finish.
I think let me give my surrogate a chance to finish, because it's most frustrating for yourselves listening to me being intermittent.
Okay, that's great. Madela, can you pick it up? And I'll give you an extra 15 seconds because of the consequences of the bad connection.
Thank you. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Thank you. Good morning. I'll just continue from where I think Anna left off. So we're talking about the fact that reducing use of fossil fuels and divesting from companies that financially support their use promotes both reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, both carbon dioxide and methane, thereby supporting keeping global warming below the 2 degrees C above pre-industrial levels, and improved health, not only through improved air quality, but reducing the severity of climate change, which will have devastating impacts on health.
Madela, could you perhaps just wrap up, because I think we're closing in on the time here now. Okay. If you want to just finish the last paragraph.
I will. Therefore, alongside recent requests for motions submitted to County Council, both within the Council and from St Albans and City District Council, we are urging Hertfordshire County Council to mandate its pension fund managers to freeze any new investments in fossil fuel companies and to divest all existing shares within 5 years. Thank you.
Thank you both for presenting that petition. I don't think we can physically exchange the signatories, but I'm sure the officers can arrange for that to be appropriately addressed. That's the end of the public petition, and we're moving to item 3, which is the Hertfordshire County Council's pension fund investment in fossil fuels. This is a motion that was brought to council and has been passed down to us to consider. So I think we have some additional speakers, but I will call them in due course. Chris, if you can hold on, I'll bring you in at an appropriate point. But the presentation is going to be by Patrick Towie to the motion.
Thank you, Chairman. Hopefully you can all see me. So you'll have all seen the paper that I prepared for this meeting this morning. It responds to the motion, and it also sets out the position of the Pensions Committee and the work that the Pensions Committee and a subgroup of cross-party members have been doing to evolve the responsible investment policy of the fund. You will no doubt understand that the fund is managed by the committee. It's a non-executive function. It's been delegated by full county council to the Pensions Committee. The fund assets are over £5 billion. Investments in fossil fuel are just under 1% of those assets. Over the last 18 months, the fund has been reviewing its investment strategy statement, and that is a full review of how we allocate assets, and the Pensions Committee has been fully involved in that. There's been a series of meetings over that period of time. We've also focused on the development of the fund's ESG, environmental, social and governance policy, and taking that forward. And in that work that we've done with the committee, we canvassed the membership to get an understanding of their beliefs. And one of the strong statements that came out from that analysis, which was undertaken by a third party, was that the committee felt strongly that we should be doing a lot more with regard to responsible investments, and taking that on board, the officers have been working with external parties and this working group of cross-party members to develop a plan to move this ESG agenda policy development forward. And as part of that development, we've looked at the asset allocation, looked at how we can analyse the impact the fund is having. So we commissioned a report which looked at the carbon footprint of the fund, and the analysis of that. Those results are contained in Appendix A to this report. We also agreed that as part of this investment strategy review, that we'd make a investment in a climate aware fund through one of our investment managers, UBS, and that investment was of £100 million. And the purpose of doing the carbon footprint analysis at the date suggested, referred to in the report of the 30th of September, was to understand what our footprint looked like prior to that investment. And as you can see from the results, when we compare ourselves to the benchmark, which is an index like the FTSE 100, our active managers, our carbon footprint, i.e. the emissions, there's two ways of analysing this, we're below the benchmark quite considerably, and on stranded assets, the potential emissions, we're also under the benchmark as well. So that's quite a significant thing to understand. We've also, since the motion was put to County Council in February, which outlined that we had £90 odd million in fossil fuel investments, that's been reduced to 48 million. Part of that was a decision by one of our investment managers to disinvest from Shell. They reviewed their business case for investment in that company, and they didn't feel that it no longer stacked up, so they made that investment decision to disinvest, which is quite a significant decision for that manager because they'd had a long-stand holding in this company of over 20 years. The fund has also made, through its one of its infrastructure managers, an investment in wind farms. We've got about £12 million invested in debt, which finances offshore wind farms in the North Sea and the Irish Sea. We've also looked at doing further analysis of the carbon footprints in the next 12 months once we've had the investment in the carbon aware fund allowed time to work its way through. But the development of the responsible investment policy for the fund, to be clear, it's an evolving piece of work. We are taking evidence to inform decisions and make strategic asset allocations based on those decisions. What you are seeing at a point in time does not reflect where we may be in 12 months' time. We've also, the fiduciary responsibility of the committee, the fund officers, is to ensure that we have sufficient assets in the fund to pay the current and future liabilities, i.e. to pensioners that are receiving pensions at the moment and future pensioners. The fund at the last triennial valuation, which is an exercise to measure how many assets we've got, how much assets we've got in the fund to pay liabilities, showed that we had 98% funding. So we had 98% of assets to pay 100% liabilities. That's a relatively good position, and we're doing work to lock in that position, and that includes putting in sort of equity option strategies to protect our equity position. It's like in a form of insurance. And this piece of work is evolving alongside other pieces within the investment strategy. That's all I was going to say on the report, and happy to take questions from members of this panel.
Thank you, Patrick. I have questions from Paul Zukowski first, then Ken Crofton.
I wanted to just say on this particular paper that it's very, very pleasing to see the reduction in exposure to oil companies that we see in the paper. What I'm a little disappointed about is that that's not driven in any way, shape or form by principles and policies on investment. In fact, as I understand it, it's immaterial what the carbon impact of an investment would be, or indeed the ethics of any of those investments, such as in tobacco companies or armaments companies even. We're quite happy to invest the members' money in any of those organisations if they make sufficient profit. And actually, I feel that you know, we're missing a point here, in that quite a lot of the people who invest in their pension don't really have much of a choice to do that. And if they knew that their money was being used to potentially damage our environment and potentially, you know, assist in the development and use of weapons and tobacco and all the other social issues that we see, they would be less than thrilled about that approach. Now, the move in the paper towards a responsible investment approach is, I think, very welcome. But I do think that we need to make sure that our fund managers know full well this is coming down the line, and there will be changes if we can achieve it, to try and encourage our businesses and our society to move in the right direction. And it really does need to happen. And I urge officers and I urge the executive to look at this and actually put pressure on whoever they need to put pressure on, to allow us to have a more ethical approach to where we put our investments. We've seen ethical investments in the last 6 months actually go leaps and bounds ahead of the FTSE 100, for example. So it's not like you're going to earn less money investing in sustainable energy, investing in companies that have an ethical policy. We're seeing that coming down the line. It really ought to be happening here. And I really wish we could actually push it to go a little bit further than this paper does, which is assess our carbon footprint, but then don't actually change our policy in any meaningful way to address that.
Thank you, Paul. Patrick, would you like to respond to that?
Yes, I think with regard to holding managers to account, we are and we have done through working with our consultants, looked at their ESG ratings. We assess each of those managers' ratings and how they engage with companies through voting at AGMs and influence. We feel that the investment managers are close to these companies and they can influence change by talking directly to the chairman and boards of those companies. We feel that there is a case through lobbying and engagement with these companies, particularly some of the fossil fuel companies that are the future enablers of a transition to the green economy, that we have that dialogue with them through the investment managers. We will, through looking at the signing up to the stewardship code, have the ability to understand whether they are doing that engagement and the transparency around that. We will look and analyse their voting behaviour, and there is a report going to the September Pensions Committee which sets out a lot more detail around stewardship and how we are going to engage with those managers going forward. I feel that that is the policy of engagement and looking at our asset allocations and using evidence to inform decisions is the right way forward. But you know, happy to take any further questions.
Ken Crofton.
Thank you, Chairman. I put my hand up in error, but actually seeing I'm here. It's just that Patrick Towe's presentation is so fulsome and so conclusive that we are taking action. I'm not certain it needs any further comment from me. Added to the fact I've got a lawnmower outside my window, which is going to be very noisy in about 30 seconds. So.
Okay, thanks, Ken. David Williams.
Thanks, Chairman. I just wanted to come in to respond to Paul's comments, and I'm afraid there are some fundamental misunderstandings here. First and foremost, this is not a matter for the executive. As Patrick explained in his presentation, and as is made clear in the report, it is the pension committee that is responsible for the pension fund and not the executive. And then I just really wanted to underscore the response to that Patrick made, and that's in respect of the environmental, social and governance criteria. So I'm well aware that the pension fund and our advisors rank and rate our investment managers depending on their adherence to the ESG criteria. So we can take a great deal of comfort that our advisors are pointing out to us those investment managers that are as ethical or more ethical than others, and we can make investment decisions based on that information. So that's it's really important that our residents and that members of committee of this committee recognise the important role that ESG is playing now in terms of investment decisions.
Thank you, David. I think you raise a specific point about the governance of the position of the council and the pensions committee, and I did read out a statement, a legal statement prepared by our team, our legal team, at the July meeting of the council, which clarified the relationship between the council and the pensions committee. And I'm gonna read it out again to set the position clearly, so that the members of the panel and any of those people watching can understand it. The Pensions Committee is responsible for what are referred to as non-executive functions, i.e. matters which are not the responsibility of the Cabinet. I have been advised that it would therefore not be constitutional for the Cabinet or any Cabinet panel to give an instruction or a recommendation to the Pensions Committee in relation to Pension Committee responsibilities. Where this is to be done, there is a risk that any subsequent decision by Pensions Committee would be challenged legally on the basis that the committee had not exercised its discretion properly, or had fettered its discretion, to use the legal term. The Cabinet could make a request to Pensions Committee to consider a matter, but great care would need to be taken with the wording of any such request to ensure that it would not be construed as effectively being an instruction, and it would be safer not to do this, particularly if the matter concerned was controversial. That situation exists. It is a differential of responsibility. There is a boundary here between the council and the Pensions Committee, and the Pensions Committee's responsibilities are clear and should not be usurped by any intervention by the Cabinet or any other its committees, committees, panels, and or council itself. So I think that's pretty clear from the legal department's perspective. I've got Eric who would like to come in and speak now.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you very much for that explanation. I must say I'm very satisfied with what I've heard today. It's a very well performing fund, and I think the committee and officers understand their social responsibilities very well. And as you say, we shouldn't, as a council or the executive, be interfering in that. So absolutely agree with all that you've just said, and well done for being above benchmark in all respects.
I think, Paul, you've indicated you'd like to come back.
Yeah, thank you, Ralph. I think we're getting a little bit sidetracked with the relationship between the executive and the pensions committee and the pension fund investments, because when I referred to the executive, I was not intending it to be the executive telling the pension committee what it needs to do. Absolutely not. I understand that there is a legal barrier that is a national legislative structure. What I was suggesting was that the executive might be in a position to say to national government, actually, if we want ethical and carbon reducing investments, you may need to change the legislation around this. Now, the executive is in the position to lobby national government for those kind of changes, and that's actually what I meant when I said that. So if I misspoke and I misled people as to what my intention was, hopefully that clarifies it.
Thank you, Paul, for clarifying that. Sharon.
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, can I thank the petitioners for their obviously passionate views on this subject, which I share. And this movement around the huge investments that go in from pension funds all over the country, I'm not talking about ours, and the power that they have to make a big change in the way that we do things, I think is an issue that's very much been a grassroots movement, and I really welcome it. One of my very first encounters with Hertfordshire County Council was before I was a county councillor, was on the pension committee as a district council's rep. And in my very early and very innocent days, I waded in about ethical investment and got my hands very hard slapped because it was felt that in those days it was all about the safety of the investment and the return on the investment, and really nothing else mattered. And I can't tell you how pleased I am, Chairman, to see how much that has moved on in recent times. I do think, you know, we don't, the executive doesn't advise the pension committee, and that's right and proper. But it's right to raise more generally issues of divestment, to tackle the issue of carbon and fossil fuels. It's right to, and I know the committee do because I've seen them do it very often, look at the voting record of the pension fund investors as shareholders, and the policy overall of fund managers. All pension funds should be, and ours do, keep their eye very closely on that, because it is through these very significant investments that pension funds make that we can exercise the real change that people want to see. And I think that's accelerated since the COVID crisis. So I hope our pension fund will continue to make the progress they're making with the economic and social aims of the fund itself. And I hope they will continue to address the issues of carbon neutral investment. And I think it's really, really important that we respond to this grassroots feeling about these very, very key matters.
Thank you, Sharon. Bob.
Thank you, Ralph. I thought I might just make 3 points, if I may. I have the benefit of being on the pensions committee, and so I know from first-hand experience that the various very professional advisors we have who advise us are very, very mindful of issues of responsible investing and ethical investing. We've had representatives of our advisors coming to sit in our meetings and explain to us the approach they take and advise us on issues that we should be considering. So I don't think there's any doubt at all that the various advisors that we have are fully aware of the importance of this issue, and indeed have people in their teams who spend all their time, full time, thinking about these issues and trying to navigate through them. And I think personally we get very good advice on that. I think the second thing that might be worth saying is just to remind people is that there is a cross-party working group that functions in relation to the Pensions Committee. I'm not on that, but I can sense very strongly at pension committee meetings that the work that committee does is pretty good, and indeed is cross-party and non-political. I think that's excellent. And I think the last thing to just say, because it's fundamental, is that there are about 100,000 people who depend on these decisions for their pensions. So the fiduciary responsibility that we have to those people and the 300 employers is very, very important indeed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bob. Chris, you've been very patient. I call you to speak now.
Thank you. With the camera off and the microphone off, you don't know how patient I'm being, but I was being patient. But thank you for bringing me in. Sort of a right to reply. I'm very impressed by this report, and I do echo what Sharon Taylor says. Is that when she and I started out, any suggestion that we should discuss matters like ethical investment, or indeed not so much ethical investment as common sense investment, as I would put it, for fossil fuels, we were slapped down pretty hard. The tone has changed. I'm delighted to see that we're having a discussion here. Of course, understand the idea of that we can't mandate. At the most, we can request, and it's best that this body doesn't request, but I can request. and that indeed the pension fund itself is looking at these things actively. So that's all good news. I'm not going to rehearse the impact of fossil fuels. The petitioners did that excellently, both in writing and in their presentation. I think we do need to remember that it's not just global warming, it's also plastics production. And I read only today that as part of the general greenwash that some of these companies are doing, that they're increasing plastics production. Plastics have their own issues. And these are issues not just for the planet as a whole, they're narrow issues for Hertfordshire. And I think there's a general thing that we should be requesting, namely that wherever possible, the pension fund does not invest in industries which harm our citizens and which increase the costs of government and local government. And these would include fossil fuels, but also things like tobacco and gambling, where the consequences are very, very costly on society. In particular, I'd just like to welcome the disinvestment in Shell and the key table. I think 2.10 probably says everything that needs to be said in this particular debate, where we've seen a reduction to a 0.89% investment in fossil fuels, which is still, however, £48 million, which is, if someone were to hand me £48 million, which isn't very likely, I'd be pretty pleased. That £48 million over the next 5 years, I would hope, would move towards renewable investment, and particularly those industries, green industries, that we hope to attract to Hertfordshire as investors as we work on things like east of Hemel Hempstead and so forth. We must always remember that this stuff now needs to be left in the ground. And frankly, when you've got the former governor of the Bank of England saying that, you know you've got a problem. So many thanks for the report and presentation. Let's keep going in this direction. And that's all I've got to say, Chair.
Thank you, Chris. Is there anybody else who would like to make any remarks before I wind up? Okay, as chair of the Pensions Committee, I'd just like to say a few words about its hard work and the hard work of those committee members who represent it. Bob has mentioned the working group who have now taken on the responsibility to drive forward the ethical investment agenda with our advisors and produce the necessary reports and processes which will inevitably bring the pensions strategy in line with its ESG objectives. They meet now on a regular basis, I think at the moment monthly, to review those policies which are brought forward to the committee for ratification in its quarterly meetings. I think their work, their hard work, that cross-party, non-political hard work is analytical and looks for evidence-based information to make those judgments on. But it has in recent times been cognizant of the existence of this issue of ethical investment and has, as Chris White has just pointed out, and I think Sharon earlier, that the change in the attitude towards this subject matter has been significant over the last year or two, and it will progress further. So that's all I'd really like to say. There are two recommendations on the order paper. I'd like to propose that we approve those for ratification and passing on to the resources patent. Let's leave that aside. I've lost my track on that one. So can I ask if you would vote for the recommendations on the order paper, either against, for, or abstain, please, in the chat line now. Has everybody voted? Okay, I think that I think it's fair to say that I didn't see any abstentions or any against, but the official position is voted majority agreed. So thank you very much. We'll move on to item 4, which is the response to the request to establish a climate emergency member advisory group. I think this is being presented by Julie Greaves.
Chairman, no, it's Simon Ayres.
Okay, Simon, sorry about that. You're clear enough, Julie.
That's fine. I'll be doing this one and the next item as well.
Okay.
I'll keep it brief. The reports are quite brief. You've seen the motion. This came through to the February full council meeting. Draw your attention to section 5, really, because that leads us to the recommendation. And just a little bit of history. The Sustainable Hertfordshire Strategy was agreed in March. And as part of that agreement, each service directorate and portfolio was tasked with developing action plans to support our strategy. That work was delayed due to COVID, but to give the departments a huge amount of credit here, action plans did come forward, 146 pages across the authority of actions, which is brilliant. We are currently working on bringing those actions together, trying to price them, prioritize them. What that means is that in this calendar year, each portfolio will see those draft action plans and hopefully recommend to Cabinet for later in the year which of those actions to take forward. The expectation then is that it would go to full county council in February. So as the action plans are still under development, we've got the panel process and potentially full council. We're not recommending at this point that a member advisory group is required. You'll see from the report, though, that is at this point in time. So that decision can be kept under review. It's a huge subject area as well. That mustn't be lost as well. And again, the expectation is that the action plans are agreed, they will be monitored by the individual panels as they go forward. So recommendation effectively is at this point in time not to set up a cross-party member advisory group. Happy to take questions.
Thank you. I'm going to look. I think Ken, have you indicated you'd like to? No, it's sorry. Paul has got his hand up. Paul.
Yeah, thank you, Ralph. Thank you, Simon. I raised this with Simon in the briefing, and I said I would bring it up in the meeting as well. The concern that I have around not creating a climate emergency MAG at this point is that the idea of developing action plans within each of the service areas or within each of the directorates is absolutely fine and actually what we should be doing. But what it then sort of directs you towards is the idea that the directorates or services are standalone entities, and there is a potential lack, in my view, of a corporate overview to bring it all together at a corporate level. And actually, that's the thing that somewhat concerns me about the idea of not having a MAG. Where is the kind of democratic oversight of that overarching interlinkage between the different directorates and different services? I understand that these action plans may well be brought forward and come to full council, where they obviously will get that kind of democratic oversight. But if they don't come as a coherent block, then how are we going to be able to easily work out whether there are synergies between directorates, synergies between service areas? And it's that I think concerns me about the idea of not having a MAG at this point. And you know, I just wanted to raise that in public because I think it's something that, you know, that sort of challenge is something that sometimes officers and the executive need to have to say, actually, are you sure that this is the right choice?
Simon.
A part of the work we're now doing to try and draw those action plans together, as you can appreciate, 146 pages is too many. We need to prioritise them. We'll be bringing some of those corporate ones together. So I don't think we're missing out anything between now and when those action plans are agreed, which hopefully is going to be towards the end of the year in February. I don't think a MAG would add particular value to that process. As I say, though, as the report says, that would be kept under review. So going forward, once the action plans are agreed, and they will always be developed and iterative as we go forward as well, of course, as will this overall strategy, then a MAG may become more relevant. That's where we are at the moment. That's my view.
Thank you, Simon. My technology is letting me down a bit at the moment. I can't necessarily see anyone who is asking an additional question. Could you perhaps?
I can see that Stephen has asked, Sharon has, and Tim and Judy.
Perhaps you could deal with it. I'm going to have to close my program and reopen it.
Okay.
So perhaps you could deal with the questions in order if you ask them yourself.
Yes, it was Stephen, according to my chat, was next, then Tim, and then Sharon, and then Judy. So Stephen.
Okay, it was more of a comment rather than a question. I have to say I'm slightly disappointed at this approach, given that we successfully have had MAGs on other issues, particularly the speed management strategy, which is now out to public consultation. And if I can give one example why I think a MAG might have been more relevant here, I have raised both at highways issues over tree planting and a tree planting strategy, then to be told that's the responsibility of the Gripe Committee, then to raise it at the Gripe Committee, be told it's responsibility of the Highways Committee or Highways Panel. And what concerns me is that we'll only get some of these clearly cross directorates, they clearly cross panels, and it's having the holistic view across the authority. I'm equally concerned when I hear you're suggesting this comes as a document to the February meeting. The February meeting is the budget meeting, and we normally consume the whole time on the budget process and don't have debates on anything else. And there may well be the need to have a substantial debate, particularly if there are areas where the opposition feels the administration hasn't gone far enough in terms of the climate emergency. And it concerns me you're suggesting this should be the February meeting. So I suppose that latter one is actually a question. Why the February meeting?
The answer to that was simply that's hopefully the first one we can get to, but good point. We can certainly...
I want an assurance if it does come to the February meeting, and as the leader is actually on this committee, that adequate time will be made available, even if it means a very long full council meeting for a full discussion, should it be so warranted. Because normally we have no discussion other than the budget at the February meeting.
The other suggestion, and David may want to come in, is that we just go to a later county council, Stephen, and we bring it forward after the budget. I missed the fact or forgotten that actually February tends to be dedicated to budget, so we can easily move that back to a later full county council.
Could I perhaps come in? Well, if we've lost Ralph for a bit, oh no, he's back. Okay, all right, Ralph, thank you. Can you hear us, Ralph? Are you?
Yes, I'm with you. I think.
Yeah.
Hear me?
Okay, sorry. Yeah.
Are there any other questions that are being put forward?
There were. So if Stephen's okay, then I think it was Tim next. Tim Williams.
Yep. Thank you very much there, Simon. Yes, I just also got my concerns very similar to Paul there about basically, the overarching sort of approach and basically the profile of sustainability, climate emergency within Herts County Council. To a certain level, and I don't think this is the case here, but it could be viewed as we're kicking it into the long grass here. And if anything, I think the profile of climate emergency should be raised. Should there even be a cabinet member with responsibility of the climate emergency sustainability? I've also got the question regarding, I know there's a Hertfordshire sustainability group which is set up with Hertfordshire County Council do play a leading part in there. Members of all the 10 district borough councils are there. So I just want to make sure that whatever we do and whatever Hertfordshire does, that we do it in line with the Hertfordshire sustainability group. We don't really want two organisations doing two different things.
Yes, I'll answer the second question and perhaps leave others to think about the first. In terms of the Hertfordshire Climate Change Sustainability Partnership, Councillor Williams identifies we are represented on that. We actually chair the officer group as well, so we're well connected to that group. Absolutely, the Sustainable Hertfordshire strategy is very well linked in. and the chair of the group, which is Graham McAndrew from East Herts, is well aware. So it's all very joined up. There's a new officer starting, employed by East Herts, not by the County Council, to help that process even more. I think you know the identification. My personal view is that ultimately we will need a single Hertfordshire, the County of Hertfordshire, sustainability strategy. At the moment, though, and I think it's great, and I think it shows the amount of enthusiasm and focus on this. Each of the 10 district and boroughs are developing their own strategy, as is the County Council. That's brilliant. And I think actually the fact that we have action plans that came from the departments at a time when they were busy on other things, 146 pages of actions, demonstrates that this authority is taking this hugely seriously. Real commitment from the departments to do this. The big challenge, of course, will be then how do we take some of these forward, because they will have costs. But that's the kind of debate will be had at panels later this year.
Thank you, Simon. Sharon, and then Judy.
Thank you. I'm very keen that first of all, I wanted to say that as well as the work that's going on in the County Council and the 10 districts, and of course, it's important that the districts do their own work, because the issues around climate change are different depending on where you are in the county. But there is also the work of the Hertfordshire Growth Board, which has a very significant strand of activity around climate change and addressing sustainability issues. But I still feel very muddled about how the oversight is being taken in Hertfordshire County Council of this issue. And I share Stephen's concerns as a member of the GRIPE panel as well, that we often get things bouncing between Highways and Environment panel and the GRIPE panel. I do think we need to be very clear when the action plan is in place about where that is being monitored, where the actions are being driven, and who is responsible. And I really do think it's necessary that one of the panels actually has climate change in its title, so that we are clear where the responsibility for driving that action and that action plan sits. Because you know, I know, I'm sure it isn't intentional, but it's very easy for busy panels to say that's not the role of this panel, it needs to go to X panel, and what happens is that things fall through the cracks and don't get done at all. So I think that's really an important issue, particularly in view of the fact we have some higher level strategic actions being developed, which of which the County Council will have a part to play, and they need pulling together as well into the overall action plan. And somewhere, either a panel or the executive or full council or all three need to be monitoring the progress of that. And I agree that February seems quite a long way away to be bringing something forward on this.
Thank you, Sharon. Judy.
I agree with everything that Sharon has just said and won't repeat any of it. But I did just want to say that I'm not entirely convinced that a MAG is a place where I have often seen truly strategic overview. We do need truly strategic overview, but that's not where I've seen such activity particularly. Stephen mentioned the speed management group. That was a very detailed piece of work rather than a strategic overview. And I do think we need to give more attention, as Sharon had suggested, to the places where this has to be constantly reported and important. But I'm just not at all sure that if you set up a MAG, that wouldn't just annex it all to yet another place, which would rarely see the light of day. So I think more thought needs to be given to this. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. Thank you, Judy. David, you wanted to come in?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. So I just wanted to come back on a couple of points that have been made. You know, first and foremost, it is important that we all recognise that we have agreed as an authority a sustainability strategy. It was agreed by Cabinet on the 23rd of March. That is a really significant piece of work that pulls together the County Council's response. I view that as a very forward-looking and a very strong document. The work was led and continues to be led by the Deputy Leader of the County Council, and therefore it does have a significant amount of oversight and weight been put behind it. If members are not familiar with the strategy, I would urge them to delve into it. Linked to that then is the intention to have much more engagement with our residents. Now, unfortunately, since the strategy was adopted in March, whilst we have had an opportunity to meet with the chair of the schools forum, because we see our school pupils, parents as being a very important element as we address this issue going forward. We haven't been able to have the sort of engagement that we had anticipated, but nevertheless, as part of the Hertfordshire Forward webinar series that we are setting up in the autumn, we are established one particular webinar on sustainability, and we've got Baroness Brown and other eminent people participating in that, and that's part of that engagement process. Mention has already been made then about the attention that's been given to this by Herts leaders as a group. As we reflect on the question of local government reform, there is a very interesting issue highlighted by this. Should we have 11 sustainability strategies in Hertfordshire, or should we have one? And that's a good example of some of the challenges we face as we think about local government reform. But putting that to one side, Herts leaders are giving this an awful lot of attention as well, as Simon outlined. Coming back to the point, two final points, one in relation to members' advisory groups. I have to say my recent experience of this has not been good. We set up a members' advisory group for our investment in Herts Living, and my recollection is that we haven't had opposition members, so the Lib Dem member or the Labour member, at the last two meetings of the MAG. And where we've got these arrangements, we really do need to have the cross-party engagement. That's what that particular members' advisory group was set up for. And there are issues of sort of commercial confidentiality, which were important in getting in as key reasons for establishing that MAG. I think the attention that climate change and sustainability will get through the panels as we go through the autumn and look at the action plans is the key way in which we can ensure on a cross-party basis we are really engaged in this agenda. And then the final point, Simon raised the notion of bringing this back to Council in February. Yes, we'll need to look at that, given that the February discussions normally are devoted to the integrated plan. So more than happy to look at that, and we'll firm that up with Simon and officers. I'm sure that will become evident then. The timetable for that will become evident as we consider the action plans through the panel arrangements. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, David. I don't see anybody else indicating that they would like to ask a question, so I'm going to move to the recommendation on the paper, which is to consider the motion set out in paragraph 1.1 and recommend, given the reasons set out in this report, a MAG at this stage is considered unnecessary in relation to the climate emergency. Could I ask everyone to indicate in the chat line whether they're for, against, or abstain, please? Has everybody voted? I didn't think I saw everybody's coming through there. Okay. Okay. I think the motion has been passed with and one or two abstentions. I'm sure it will be reflected in the minutes, but certainly there was a significant number of people in agreement. So thank you very much, Simon. And that recommendation is passed. Item 5 on the agenda, which is climate emergency implications in the Cabinet Panel report. Again, Simon, I think this is going to be you, so I'll leave you to take this one forward.
Yeah, so I'll keep this even briefer. So again, motion at County Council in February that Cabinet panel report should include a climate emergency implications section in relation to all proposals in its reports. Effectively, the recommendation is yes, so that in all decision reports, not information reports, and this is sort of normal practice, so in all decision reports that go to panel to consider recommendations to pass to Cabinet, that there should be a section dedicated to climate emergency stroke sustainability, like we do for legal and finance issues. We'll need to do a little bit of work just to help services understand what that kind of paragraph needs to consider, but effectively agreement with that motion that in decision reports a paragraph should be included.
Thank you, Simon. Adam.
I was just going to check with Simon that this is a 12-month sort of trial period, because it is actually mentioned in the report, but it isn't mentioned in the recommendation. So I was just double checking that this is a trial period. Perhaps we'll review at the end of that 12-month period.
Yes, as you say, it's a bit of an oversight, really. It should have been reflected in the recommendation as a trial period. The reason for that is just to see the value that is added. So yes, we may need to adjust the recommendation to say as a 12-month trial.
Thank you, Adam. Paul.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, I probably should have asked this the other day in the briefing, but it only just really occurred to me now. The question that I've got is, in terms of the people who will actually be completing that section, is the council intending to offer them any training so that they can actually start to understand what the climate change implications might be of the work that they're suggesting coming forward?
Yes, we're already doing that, actually. We've got, from each department, we have nominated champions or representatives. They are available accessing training around carbon and all sorts of other things. So yes, and just like finance and legal sections in reports, we will also be able to check and give advice from the sustainability team themselves. So yes, there'll be plenty of support. And again, it just reflects I think the enthusiasm and the importance departments are putting in on this agenda, that we have a lot of people wanting to get involved, which is great.
Thank you. Stephen, are you indicating you'd like to ask a question?
Yes, sorry, just found my off mute button. Yeah, it's this 12-month thing. The climate emergency is not going to disappear in 12 months. So I cannot understand for the life of me suggesting a trial period of 12 months. Now, I can understand that you might want to refine that in future by having one committee that deals with the climate emergency or one panel. Fine, in which case that would change. But why a trial period of 12 months? We don't have a trial period for the equality impact assessments for 12 months. They're in there as a matter of need and requirement. And I cannot for the life of me understand, there's no justification given in paragraph 5.6 why it's 12 months. It could be 18 months, it could be 2 years, it could be 6 months. Can we have some justification for this?
Yeah, there was no science behind the 12 months, Stephen, to be honest. It was just, as I said, it's really to ensure that the paragraph adds value rather than just adds work for officers. I don't disagree with you that done right, I suspect after 12 months we'd be agreeing that they should remain in. But it's effectively just to ensure that we do add value to reports rather than just add work.
Judy?
Thank you. I think these sorts of discussions and arguments are a bit futile about whether it's 12 months, 6 months, 15 years. Can I suggest that it just be added to all reports? And if it comes to a point where we're not finding it useful anymore because the whole issue has been sorted and we're living in a glorious new utopia, we can then say to each other in a grown-up and sensible way, let's stop doing this. But until we get to that point, let's not have any time limit on it at all. It's just daft. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy. I'm not going to propose that we put a time limit on this. What I am going to propose is that it's just reviewed after 12 months, and that that review looks at how impactful this proposal has been. It might be very positive, in which case that's all to the good. But if we were having a review to see what the implications of that new part of the report has been, then my suggestion is, and I'm making the proposal, that after the wording in the current recommendation, we merely add to be reviewed after 12 months. Okay. Can I ask everyone if they could indicate in the chat line whether they're in agreement with that modified recommendation, for, against, or abstention. Okay, thank you. I think the indication is that that was a majority in favour, so that amended recommendation will be passed on. Going on to item 6, which is requesting a review of policies, information, technology and training in support of transgender people. And I think that Sally Hooper is going to be addressing this report. Sally, over to you. Sally, are you on the line? Are we missing Sally? It appears so. Just to check that, are people hearing me? Just to make sure that that's not a technical issue.
Yes, Ralph. Yes.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Sorry, have we got Sally on the line? Okay, what I'm going to suggest, therefore, is that whilst we check where Sally is, that we move on to item 7. We'll return to item 6 if we can find Sally in the meantime. So item 7. Sally, you're here. Okay, we'll return to item 6 now, and Sally can address the paper.
Thank you. So please may I begin by reminding everyone that we received a motion which is set out in paper in 2.2, and in that motion it questioned our commitment to transgender in terms of our policies and our infrastructure around IT, and then it also went in to take account of the 2018 consultation. So thinking about the details of the motion, we set about looking at what have we got in place, and hopefully members can see that in 2.3 we have set out what is already in place. And just for the avoidance of any doubt, to clarify, we talk about members being trained, but of course also staff are trained. So just to clarify that point for everybody today. And then I go on in the paper to ask members if they consider that what I've set out in the paper and what the County Council is already doing to support our transgender members of the community and staff is sufficient. And that's what I would welcome your thoughts on today. Thank you.
Anybody would like to ask Sally a question in relation to the report? I'm not seeing any hands up or items in the chat line. Do I take it that everyone has been significantly impressed by the report? Okay, Paul.
Yeah. Thank you, Ralph. I just thought it was sensible to just say that I think it is a very comprehensive report. I'm glad Sally made the interjection that she did about the staff, because I raised that when I first read the report. I was a bit surprised that staff weren't mentioned, given that it was in the original thing. So it's really good, and Sally has outlined exactly what that consists of, which is ongoing training on a regular basis. and an evaluation of staff's awareness of LGBTQ plus issues. Sorry, get my tongue twisted. You know, I'm actually quite content that we've got a good handle on this. I think there's always work that could be done to improve awareness and our outreach to all communities. But I think I'm quite happy with the report, and I commend our approach, really.
Thank you, Paul. Sharon.
Thank you, Chair. I too thought it was a good report, and I think the diversity and inclusion strategy is very comprehensive. I think the important thing, and there are two really important things in here. One is that we have a group in the county council for staff, transgender staff, so that they can raise issues as they arise, because we don't always know what issues people are going to come across in the course of their working lives. So there needs to be a very clear channel of communication and some champions that people can contact if they have concerns. I think that's in place. Similarly, with our community, I think our community need to feel that we do want to hear from them if they do come across difficulties in using county council services that are related to transgender or any other issues of diversity and equality. From what I can see from the report and the diversity strategy, that those routes are in place, but I think we need to check back on that from time to time and just make sure they're working properly, and that people do feel that they've got somewhere to go if they come across an issue that means they feel that their needs are not being looked after.
Thank you, Sharon. I too was impressed with the report. I think Sally has made this a significant issue for the HR department in ensuring that all of our transgender community are included within the policies of the council and are respected and so forth in those policies. So perhaps I think perhaps David Williams, sorry. David.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Sorry, I was somewhere else. I just wanted to make a shout out for two things. Firstly, the publication of the latest version of our diversity and inclusion strategy, which was published over the summer, and I would encourage colleagues to read that and be familiar with it. It does take this agenda that step further, and as I understand, it has been well received by staff. The other thing is that those who read the Municipal Journal may have seen that our Chief Executive, Owen Mapley, and one of our senior managers in Children's Services, Tendai Morowi, have published an article about our approach to diversity in Hertfordshire County Council, and that's also a very good read. So I would encourage you to check that out. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, David. So I was going to perhaps on the hoof create an appropriate recommendation given the circumstances, and perhaps we can agree that the panel recommends to Cabinet that it respects and approves the current proposals and policies of the council in respect of transgender people within the organisation, and leave it at that. I hope someone was with either writing down that or recording it somewhere. But I think the sentiment is appropriate, and I'd like to invite people to either say they are in favour or against or abstain from that within the chat line. Just waiting for the final count, head count, I think. All agreed. So that's been agreed. Thank you, Sally, for your presentation, and that will be presented to Cabinet at the appropriate time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Moving on to item 7, Hertfordshire County Council's response to the COVID-19 September update. This was a report that was normally going to, or has always gone in the past to the special Cabinet panel, and this is the first time it's been presented to a resources panel meeting, and I'm sure there will be some issues in relation to the appropriateness or otherwise of questions that might be better dealt with at other panel meetings. And I've agreed with Alex, who is presenting the paper, that should there be situations which are unable to be responded to by us, that we would then pass them on to the appropriate panels specialising in those subject areas. So Alex, over to you for the presentation.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, everybody. As has been mentioned, this is the September edition of the monthly general COVID report that's been going to Cabinet over the last 6 months or so, I think now, on the impact of the pandemic in the county and the County Council's response. As mentioned, previous reports have been to the special Cabinet panel prior to going to Cabinet. Clearly, following the resumption of the normal panel system, we've sought to take a slightly different approach. Let's say a general paper coming to resources and performance before going on to Cabinet, the paper in front of you, but then also with the understanding that other more specific items are going to other relevant panels during the course of the panel cycle. And I know throughout September, I'm sure going forward, a lot of the agendas understandably are dominated for all the other Cabinet panels with COVID-related topics, whether it's local outbreak planning in terms of public health and prevention, schools returns around education, libraries and localism, and so on. As such, this report covers 3 main elements, and actually we're deferring to other colleagues to provide you a summary on some of those things. First of all, it's a general update on key developments over the last month. It does seek to cover areas which we felt to be of particular kind of importance as highlights, things like the progress on local outbreak planning, the end of Operation Shield, and indeed the emerging ongoing plans for Operation Sustain, preparation for school returns, work that's being done in town centres to make sure they're safe and secure, as well as also work with businesses from trading standards and others about making sure that they are also sort of trading in a COVID secure way. As ever, though, this report clearly is as accurate, hopefully, as at time of writing. On this occasion, the cut-off date was the 19th of August, but clearly things continue to move swiftly in this area. So inevitably, there is always going to be an element of lag here. But nonetheless, we'll be happy to take any comments and questions. But before I do that, perhaps I'll be moving on in a moment to talk about the second monthly impact monitor, passing over to Martin Orst as the head of intelligence to give a summary of the emerging trends in that. And then once Martin's spoken, we've also got Stephen Pillsworth on the line to talk about the ongoing financial implications of the pandemic on the County Council, which is also outlined in this report. So if I may, I will now pass over to Martin to give you a short summary on the impact monitor and the kind of key trends coming out of that.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Chairman. Indeed, I will try and keep it short. As Alex said, this is the second data set now to attach itself to the monthly update report. As in that context, we took feedback from Cabinet panel when it was discussed for the first time and from elsewhere, have responded, I hope positively, provided quite a lot more comprehensive summary, commentary. We've added in some new measures, particularly around registry services and some community measures as well. Perhaps most impactful, I hope, is about adding in some prior year data where it's A, available, and B, relevant, which does help us to detect early days, some early patterns which are beginning to emerge, some categories in terms of the responses or the impact. But the caveat around that is obviously September and October, particularly with schools going back, is going to be hugely important in crystallising exactly what those trends are and what they mean. So perhaps very quickly, if I just summarise what I think the trends are, or those categories are, and perhaps a few examples to help you. Perhaps the first thing to say is, I mean, in terms of service impact across the piece, I mean, there are no service failures which are evident from the data, which we would of course be picking up in other places were there, and that's confirmed by performance data as well. In terms of categories, perhaps closed services, which things like registry services, waste disposal sites, which were completely shut down, are beginning to come back on stream. The data shows how that's beginning to impact. Disrupted services in the early phase of full reopening, the two key ones are schools, libraries. Category where backlogs are beginning to be caught up, but not necessarily to levels that we're clear about whether they're going to get back to previous levels, less than or more than. And perhaps 4 I'd highlight: referrals, crucially, to children and adult care, new adult safeguarding concerns, things like referrals to money advice unit, and customer reported highway defects now that more of us are travelling on our roads. There are a few areas highlighted in the report where COVID has generated quite substantial impact in terms of demand, increasing it. 2 are exemplify children looked after numbers, where people are entering care at a higher rate than they're exiting care for various reasons. And contacts to trading standards, continued upturn, quite a significant expansion of demand, initially on the back of COVID, but increasingly now about small business inquiries, business startups and the like. Perhaps the last category I'd highlight is about new normals beginning to emerge in some areas, both in terms of the nature of the impact and also the delivery models as part of our response. Ones that I'd highlight here: elective home education, indications that that's going to be a growing trend over the coming weeks and months, as articulated in education, health and care plans. Online death registrations as part of the response to meet our statutory obligations during shutdown in COVID, at the peak of COVID. The ability for citizens to register online was developed and put in place very quickly, and that is being received in very difficult circumstances, obviously very positively by citizens, and is almost certain to be an ongoing element in terms of the service will offer going forward. Online library issues continue to increase. It was a trend that was already in place, but is likely, almost certain, to increase going forward. Big one, working from home in all aspects. What our proxy for that within this report is about business mileage, and the data shows we have a 75% reduction in business mileage, but also other aspects of working from home in what we're doing here, committee business, etc. And another one which I perhaps would highlight that we want to keep an eye on is about reduced traffic flows and all the impacts of that. The conventional wisdom or the metrics out there is there's about a 97% return to traffic volumes. It's not quite the pattern we're recording in Hertfordshire. We've still got about a 20% reduction in overall peak volume, so we're keeping a close eye on that. And lastly, in terms of what's on the watch list, and this is by the panels as well as service boards, obviously, and we'll be keeping an eye on this through this lens too. Perhaps the key one at the moment, school attendance, especially with vulnerable groups, referrals into children's services and adult care, again, especially with schools coming back and the referral pathways beginning to reopen fully. Child and adult mental health referrals. There has been a disruption in the reporting mechanisms. We are expecting quite an increase in that. We've set the benchmark data there, but we haven't got the actuals in the report fully developed yet. But with the schools back, we're keeping a very close eye on that. Safeguarding concerns where domestic abuse cited, keeping a very close eye on that, currently running at levels of 50% above previous volumes, and related to that, contacts from domestic abuse investigations special unit into families first. CLA numbers I mentioned earlier, seeing how that begins either to level out or continues to increase. Library issues and visits. Fire and rescue attendance standards now, traffic volumes are increasing. It's had a measurable impact in improving slightly attendance standards, and with volumes increasing, we need to see how that settles down. And then things like business miles, keep a close eye on, and sickness data particularly, and drilling down underneath some of that in terms of some of the reasons, particularly things like musculoskeletal, seeing if that is a pattern that's emerging in terms of people working from home, perhaps in not the most perfect environment in some cases. And lastly, things like secure site risk assessments and pledges. We're currently running at 70% site assessments formally signed off and 50% pledges issued. Perhaps I'll leave it there and happy to hand back to Alex and respond to any questions and comments.
I think we'll move on to Steve and get all the reports out, and then we'll ask and return to questions afterwards. So, Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. Yes, I'll give a brief run through of Section 8 of the report, the financial update. The information here is based on our return to government at the end of July, which indicates at the moment we are forecasting COVID costs this year of around £72 million. Indeed, if you take into account some of the other funding we're receiving and spending, including funding from health partners and some of the specific grants, including infection control, actually the total forecast spend this year will be nearer £110 million. It just gives you some indication of the extraordinary scale that COVID is having on our communities and our support to them. Since the last report we brought forward, those costs have increased by around £8 million in total. But I think what is really important to note is actually within that there has been quite a bit of movement. Some costs have increased. So, for example, in adult care services and supporting care providers, and that's around extending the timeline to the end of September that we provide that support. Other areas have reduced. So, for example, in home to school transport, as it's become clearer with the return of schools, what our requirements are in terms of distancing on transport, actually those costs are lower than our original estimates. But I think it just does demonstrate the state of flux and the uncertainty around some of these forecasts and how things are constantly changing. Overall, we have, of course, received a substantial amount of grant from government for these costs, but at the moment, those grants don't cover all of those costs I've outlined. And in the report, you'll see with confirmed grant, with estimates of other grant to come, we think that gap is around £9 million. At that level, that would exhaust all of the contingency we budgeted for in the current financial year. And indeed, since this return to government, further cost pressures have emerged, and that gap has actually widened to £12 million, which of course would mean not only exhausting that contingency, but getting into the position of drawing on our reserves. As such, we feel we do need to be careful moving forward to keep some control on these costs. And I think that's partly reflected in the uncertainty I mentioned. You know, it does feel like there will be additional cost impact moving forward, but also around some of the uncertainty around whether there will be any other government funding coming forward to help support the position. And maybe if I just give you sort of an example of how we might need to deal with things moving forward. Adult Care Panel, I think next week, will consider a report about how we extend that support to adult care providers to make sure what they've got, what they need to continue to provide care services through October, November and December. But that report outlines some measures for how we will meet the cost of dealing with that. So we can continue to respond. We just need to be quite careful and put plans in place for how we're going to cover that. Then just lastly, all my comments so far focus very much on the current financial year and how we're managing that. You will see some reference to the report about us turning our attention to next financial year. And indeed, you know, we are aware And I think those of you who are Twin Hatters will have probably heard from district council colleagues about the impact COVID is having on council tax collection rates and also business rates collection. And we're hearing pretty strong likelihood of shortfalls in that income collection this year, quite understandably because of the impact on businesses and our residents. That shortfall does feed through into next year's budget, so we could be facing a pretty significant loss of income for next year's budget. Now, clearly, we are hoping there is some response to government from that when we get the spending review announcement, likely to be later on this year in November. But we can't simply wait for that, and equally we don't know whether that will meet all of that shortfall. So you'll see in the report we have kicked off the IP process and are working with departments to see what might be the implications of that. And clearly any proposals along those lines will be brought through panels, scrutiny, and finally council in due course. So that's everything I wanted to say on the report this morning. So happy now we turn it over to general questions on the whole report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that comprehensive review. I have two people asking questions at the moment. First is Adam and then Paul.
Hello, yeah, I'd just like to ask a question about the map on page 4, which shows the death rates in different towns throughout Hertfordshire, and actually Stevenage has a pretty low death rate from COVID, despite its sort of commuter links to London and its sort of transport links to London, but that doesn't seem to be reflected in the key to the map, and I was just wondering why they don't match up. Is there something else being shown in the map that doesn't relate to the death rates from COVID?
No, Adam, those are the official figures that we've got that we've mapped out. So if you think there's an error in that, we'll look at that with public health. But no,
it's just that the shading is darker, isn't it, for Stevenage, which implies a higher rate. But obviously Stevenage has the lowest rate in Hertfordshire of the lowest death rate, which is a good news story, and it would just be nice if the map reflected that.
Yeah, okay, I see your point. We'll have a look at that. It may well be just how we mapped it, so apologies for that. The numbers are right.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Paul.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a number of observations, a question, and actually a suggestion. So I've got a number of things that I wanted to cover. So
if you go through them, you could reference them to the document, and we can pick them up. Absolutely.
So I'll start with the main report as opposed to the appendix, because it seems sensible to go in that order. In section 8.1 of the report, the finance update, there's a statement at the bottom regarding the further loss of income support. So within the last government announcement, there was a suggestion that government would look at lost income from councils, and there was some uncertainty about how that would be calculated, that I believe has since subsequently been clarified. I know this report was written a couple of weeks ago, and that position may have been given more clarity in the intervening period. So what the report says is the method of calculating is not completely understood. Current working estimates are an additional 6 million. I wondered if there was any further clarity about how correct that assumption of 6 million was, and whether it may have gone up or down given the increasing clarity of how that had been worked out.
Okay, if I could come in there, thank you, Paul. Yes, you're right. The original announcement was before the summer break, and included 3 high-level principles as to how it might operate, nothing more than that. We have in the last week received some more detailed guidance, and indeed I think whilst I've been on the panel call this morning, looks like we've got the spreadsheet we need to complete and send back. Now, our initial view from the guidance is that we should still be near the £6 million, but that guidance, I have to say, is far from clear, and I think we'll need to look at the spreadsheet they've released and work that through in detail. Indeed, we know one of the national consultancies that's helping the County Councils network and others, Pixel Consulting, have done a national picture of that and have a lower number for us than £6 million. So Scott Walker in my team is in touch with them today just to understand why do they have a lower number than us and try and understand that. And we'll work that through, and we're due to make our first submission later this month on it. But there is some risk that the amount we get could be lower than that. Hopefully the position will be clearer later this month when we do the first submission.
Thank you, Stephen. I think that comprehensively answers that. Sorry, Scott.
No, just sorry. If it's okay, Chair, I've got an even more up-to-date update from Stephen that it's just dropped in the last 10 minutes from Scott Walker that Pixel have updated their model on some assumptions, and it's looking like a forecast of £6.7 million for us rather than a lower figure.
That's good news, I would say.
Good.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, shall I move on to the?
Yes, go ahead, Paul.
So I think the first one is to point out on 7.8 on the appendix, which is the registration of deaths. And actually, I think we need to openly and publicly congratulate the team for managing that workload spike so effectively, whilst maintaining the sensitivity to families. And I have anecdotal evidence where I've had a resident who sadly had their family member pass away. And, you know, they have some religious requirements that are, you know, they're not unusual, but, you know, in such a situation, you might expect that those would be difficult to deliver. The team delivered them perfectly, and the resident rang me to actually say thank you for delivering so effectively. So I think we ought to be publicly congratulating that team on maintaining service while under such huge pressure. The next bit I wanted to move on to sections 8.4 and 8.5, which I thought were extraordinarily interesting. The transport data around Hertfordshire. I did wonder whether that data was available for geographic areas around Hertfordshire to see whether there was variations, particularly in, you know, who was using transport for what. You see in 8.5, you know, information about number of journeys to work, number of journeys in residential terms, number of journeys to parks and so on. I wonder whether there was any variation geographically in that. But that's perhaps me being a bit of a geek in terms of geography and data. But the two things that I think I want to finally finish on is first 8.2, but the unemployment numbers. Those have got to be really quite concerning, in that it would appear we've had a spike of unemployment and it doesn't appear to be dropping away. I suspect that might well be because of retail organisations and similar releasing staff and making staff unemployed. And it really does concern me that we've seen a spike in unemployment and that will continue for some time. And I challenged officers about it. They said they're talking to the LEP about what they might do in terms of retraining and so on. I think the council does need to have a focus on that. And finally, a suggestion, it relates to 3.8 and 3.10 in the appendix. 3.8 being children in need attending school, and 3.10 being overall number of children looked after attending school. And I was quite surprised to see the straight count of numbers suggesting that more children in need and children looked after are not attending school than are. I wondered whether, Ralph, you might be willing to consider referring those two graphs to the children's panel for assessment and evaluation and perhaps more detailed assessment to work out what's going on there, because that is a really quite a worrying trend. If we're corporate parents, as we are for the children looked after, to have more of our children not going to school than going to school is quite a worry. Now, it could be that it's the tail end of the COVID epidemic and things will change in September. I don't discount that might be the answer, but I think it's worth asking the question, and I think that should be referred to the children's panel for further comment.
Thank you, Paul. I'm going to ask Martin and Alex if they can address the questions that you raised, and I'll come back to the children's issue at the end, unless Martin or others have been able to explain the situation.
Thanks, Chairman. In terms of Paul's comments about 8.4 and 8.5, the geography is certainly not a geeky question. It's a good question. I can confirm that in terms of the 8.4, the traffic volumes, that's based on our mobile site monitoring. The response I got back from the department is that that's a limited number, and they wouldn't consider it, and they do move around to get good coverage over time. They wouldn't be able to cover districts, if you like, in sufficient depth to provide statistically significant. So whilst we could do it, there's no data that I think would want to surface that would consider relevant at geographic level. In terms of 8.5, which is about what are people travelling for, that's Google derived. There's no doubt it's all geo-referenced by the nature of how the data is collected, but we ain't got it. So it's not something we can get at. We can't drill down beyond that. If it becomes available, clearly we'll be surfacing that. In terms of the unemployment numbers, yes, Paul, it is an increase, and I think as a comment in the actual report at 8.2, we would expect a further upward movement as the furlough scheme begins to scale back at the end of September and October. And my only comment about the 3.8, 3.10, the corporate parenting numbers, if you like, I think as I mentioned during the briefing, we have tried to, as an authority, benchmark how's that compared to national. We're talking about 38, 40%, where we ended up in terms of attendance. The best figures we've got are 10% in terms of some national figures. We can't be any more specific than that. There's nothing in the public domain, but for what it's worth, we appear to be better than others. But if we take the corporate parent, our numbers are actually better as corporate parents than parents of people who are not in the safeguarding categories, slightly better. So, relatively, we get quite a good percentage of both children in need, children child protection register, and children looked after. But obviously we'll take forward the comment that you made to the panel.
Thank you, Martin. And I think that's an appropriate position to take, given that it's a specific service-related issue. Children's Services panel would be the best place to address that. So perhaps, Alex, if you could drop a little note to the panel manager and ask if that could be introduced into a future AOB issue, or if necessary on one of the agendas.
Yes, absolutely.
Great. Stephen, I've noted your wish to speak. I'm just going to give the opportunity to panel members to speak first, and then I'll call you. Eric, you've shown an interest in asking a question.
Yes, thank you. At the bottom of page 74, it talks about the formally closing or standing down of the Operation Sustain, and I can understand that. Just above it, there's an item about the jointly funded Hertfordshire Economic Recovery Team, where it's the Council's Monetary Advice Unit and Citizens Advice, having a team of advisors for a 12-month period. to work with those with complex financial problems. And of course, given the economic impacts, they can have an effect on mental health. I'm just wondering when that 12 months period runs from, and I'm just wondering whether, again, given the potential long-term nature of the economic impacts, whether that could be a service that runs for longer. Thanks, Chairman.
Scott, as the chairman of the economic recovery section, would you like to pick that one up?
Thank you, Chair. Just to update you, the actual chairmanship has moved over of the economic recovery cell to Neil Hayes of the LEP, but I'm more than happy to take that question back, and we'll get a written answer back to the committee.
Thank you very much. David Williams.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, I just wanted to underscore some of the comments in relation to the NEET figures and the unemployment figures. We need to recognise, for all the reasons I'm sure people can envisage, that there is a huge challenge in terms of employment. So as the furlough scheme unwinds, and as particular sectors, certain manufacturing areas, hospitality, retail, there are some enormous challenges, and that's why Scott referred to Neil Hayes from the LEP taking over the responsibility for the economic recovery cell. There is now an economic recovery plan which those colleagues who sit on the LEP board and the growth board will be familiar with. It identifies in some detail how unemployment is going to affect different parts of the county in different ways. So there are some parts of the county where there are more professional jobs or local government jobs, public sector jobs, which are going to be less affected. But some areas, and notably in Broxbourne, they have a greater reliance on retail and hospitality, food and beverage, and the pressures are going to be greater. So there is a whole series of measures that have been set out in the recovery plan, the work of the growth board, the work of the growth hub, and we have seen the announcement that came from the government over the last couple of days in terms of the kickstart approach in order to get younger unemployed people back into employment. So this is going to be a huge challenge, and it's not a spike. It's something that we are going to have to be addressing over the coming months and coming years, and we shouldn't underestimate the challenge. And that, in my view, the collaboration that happens between the Growth Board, the County Council, the districts and boroughs, and the LEP, and some of our key stakeholders in the county, including the FE colleges and the university, are going to be absolutely fundamental in terms of taking this forward. And one element of that will be the refresh that's going on of the Hertfordshire Skills Strategy, which is this pretty unique approach that we've had since 2013, whereby the LEP, the County Council and the DWP have worked together in order to produce a skills strategy for Hertfordshire. So one other thing I just wanted to mention, and that was over the last 2 days, we've obviously seen children going back to school, and the report's not been really able to cover the enormous effort that's been undertaken in terms of addressing the home to school transport needs. And I have to say that be it in children's services led by people like Jane Avery, and then Andrew Highfield in terms of the integrated transport team, they have worked miracles in order to put in place a transport infrastructure for our children. And the reports that we've had over the last 48 hours is that is going extraordinarily well. We've got something like 50 plus staff actually on site at various places, transport interchanges, schools, etc., monitoring areas that might be hotspots in terms of getting children onto public transport or indeed making other arrangements with their parents or responsible for sport, the use of small vehicles to get people to school. So it's been a fantastic effort, and I'm sure that will be highlighted in the Children's Cabinet panel coming up. But I just wanted to share that with colleagues because so far it is going, it's certainly exceeding my expectations in terms of how we've been able to respond to a hugely challenging issue.
Thank you, David. Sharon.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a car alarm going off outside the window, so my apologies if that disturbs what's going on. First of all, most of my comments will be about Section 8 of the report itself on the finance side. As Stephen Pillsworth said, the sums involved in this are literally eye-watering when you think 110 million just in Hertfordshire spent on COVID overall. And we still have a 9 to 12 million pound gap there. My question about that is what representations are being made to government? We had a resources panel of the Local Government Association last week when we were looking at this in some detail with Sarah Pickup, formerly from Hertfordshire County Council. And I do think we need to continue to stress with the government not only the gap in funding that's arisen, but the very long lag between announcements of funding for local government and the time that takes to get through. Stephen was pointing out that some of the income related, the loss of income related funding, we are still being asked for information to justify the cost there. So none of it's made its way through. That makes our financial planning incredibly difficult. And I don't envy Scott and Stephen and the team in doing that. But looking to next year, as Stephen was talking about, this picture, as we've heard about unemployment, we've heard about the potential impacts of the end of furlough, of tackling, the ongoing mental health and family issues arising, the impact on children's and adult services, the impact potentially of receipts of council tax and business rates. This picture is not going to get any easier. So I hope this council will be making those representations. And I would say that, local government, and I don't want to get in early into the debate on the next item, Chair, but the impact on employment of having to cut millions and millions of pounds out of budgets. If we do that through cutting jobs and services in local government, that makes the whole situation overall worse. So I do think we need to continue to make the point to government about the overall funding situation. There's a £7 billion gap nationally between what local authorities think it's cost them and what the government has provided in funding. So I think that's key to the representations we continue to make. And a couple of very much more specific points. One is I don't know what's happened to rough sleeper funding, but in Stevenage we've had under 11,500, and we've spent nearly £500,000 on rough sleeper funding. I'm told that went to county level. I wrote and asked what had happened to it. I haven't had a response to that. So is it possible to know what's happened to that rough sleeper funding? Because it hasn't made its way out, certainly to my district yet. Second question, there is a referral to the 6.1.2 to the recovery phase, recovery coordinating group chaired by the current Chief Executive of Welwyn Hatfield Council. I know that, and congratulations to Rob Bridge for his appointment to one of the new unitary councils in Northamptonshire. But is there a handover being arranged for that? Because this work is so critical and so live. I hope that a replacement has been agreed for Rob Bridge and that something is being put in place for that handover to take place. Third question, I didn't see in the appendix anywhere domestic abuse mentioned. We've had a 90% increase in domestic abuse referrals in Stevenage, and that we run services for East Herts, North Herts and Welwyn Hatfield as well. And the increases are replicated across all of those areas. So that incurs costs on a variety of council services. So I wondered whether that could be considered in future reports. The COVID recovery group that's referred to, I would be interested to know who's involved in that COVID recovery group, and whether there are opposition representatives and district representatives on there. I just don't know the answer to that, so forgive me for that. I did want to say I've been on the community reassurance cell. There's been some really, really good work done on that cell relating to the Black and minority ethnic communities and a disproportionate impact on those communities through the COVID pandemic, both in terms of infection and mortality. And I commend that work. I think it's really been very good work that's been done. And that's ongoing to both make sure that members of our communities are aware of the increased risk and that we do support them with that. And also the Money Advice Unit, which has been a real support to the Community Reassurance Cell in helping us to get information out there to people who are struggling financially. So thank you to both of them. And just a very small point, but an important one that I wrote to Councillor David Williams about. We do still get occasions when the right hand doesn't seem to know what the left hand's doing. So we had an incident last week where Highways granted some road closures in Stevenage for events that we didn't think in public health terms were really very advisable to go ahead. So I do think we need to be tying up some ends here, making sure that the departments are connecting with each other, so public health are involved if there is a road closure application. So there are some loose ends that need tying up. And lastly, Chair, I do want to give a massive thank you to Jim McManus and his team in public health, who through all of this, I mean, Jim has just taken a break, and I'm glad he did, but the work of the public health team has been absolutely outstanding throughout all this. And we're always loath to pick individuals out because I know there's been some amazing work done across both in districts and at county level by a huge number of officers. Jim leading the way on the public health side has given all of us great comfort in knowing that his professionalism, his expertise is leading the work we do. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. A lot of comments and questions in there. Scott has indicated that he'll deal with the rough sleeper question. So, Scott, for your first kick-off.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yes, the matter was brought to our attention, Sharon, by district officers, and a paper was brought to our strategic management board probably about a month ago now. I had sent a note out to chief executives. I'll get a copy of it and get it forwarded on to you. But ultimately, the proposal again, the funding splits are all very complicated, and we could end up falling down a rabbit hole on this. So we've proposed a pragmatic solution that districts pick up the costs up to June 2020, and the county council picks up the relevant costs through to the end of this financial year, and then we review after that. It evens itself out approximately as the numbers are lower as we're now moving forward. But overall, we felt that was a fair compromise, and I've heard nothing to the contrary from the districts that they were unhappy with that. But I'll get you a copy of the letter.
Thank you, Scott. Alex, are there any issues that you can address that Sharon raised?
Perhaps if I could direct you to Martin, because I know he's happy to talk about the domestic abuse indicators in the impact monitor.
Thanks, Alex. Yes, Sharon, there are a couple of references you've probably picked up to domestic abuse, 2.8 relating to adult care and 3.2 relating to families first, but certainly I'll take your point away and see if we can trawl and get a broader picture on domestic abuse as part of this report, but I'll be diving into what the two panels are putting together already to that end.
Thank you. I know Sharon mentioned Rob Bridge. I'm not sure if there's anyone on the line who can address that issue. Just to
probably try and be able to help a little bit. That I know that the Chief Executive Owen Mapley is in consultation with his colleagues on CECG to look for a substitute, or sorry, a replacement for Rob Bridge, and to also ensure that an appropriate handover takes place to maintain the continuity and the good work that's taken place up to now.
And before you go, Scott, the last one I think on my list was the COVID recovery group or team. The question was, who are they and what they're doing?
Okay, so there is an internal HCC COVID recovery group that is focusing on almost like the county council services recovery, and how we're now going to be effectively delivering our services, both in terms of the new demands that we're now facing with the long-term effects of COVID, but also taking some of the opportunities that COVID has presented us, if we can say that in a positive way, in the way that we now reshape our organisation to deliver our services. So that's been very much an internal group. But no, it's a fair point that the engagement with members across the parties on the shaping of that, we do now need to be thinking about before we make some of these key decisions. So I'll take that point back to our lead officer, which is Adam Morrison, on this. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott.
Chair, can I just come in and say that
Sure.
it would also be helpful to, if the IP work is starting early, so that we can take account of some of the very serious issues that Stephen raised earlier in the meeting. I would really appreciate opposition spokes being involved in that work early too. So if that's possible, so that we can start looking early at the, obviously if we've got a 12 million gap to address, that will involve some serious decisions to be taken around services. So if opposition spokes can be involved in that early IP work, I'd really appreciate it.
Okay. No, I can commit.
Organised.
Yeah, I can commit to that. I'll sort that out. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, I think the highways issue, Sharon, I think you need probably to take that in through to the exec member for highways, Phil, and I'm sure he'll be interested in the consequences of that problem and trying to sort it out for you. Stephen, you've been extremely patient, and I know you would like to ask some questions.
No, thank you, Chair. No, I totally accept you have to take committee members first, and I appreciate you calling me in any event. So that's perfectly understandable, Ralph. Not a problem. Can I just clarify? Some of these I may not need to ask. As I understand it from what was introduced originally, was that some of these elements will also go to the respective other panels. So for instance, I have a number of quite detailed questions in relation to work in town centres and the active travel. If that's coming to the highways panel, I'm not an issue. And I can raise the questions there, which is probably rather more appropriate to do so. And to some extent, the other question I wanted to raise was on the appendix about the traffic issues, where it indicates in 8.4 the rate of increase has plateaued in the last few weeks, and although schools have yet to be fully reopened in September, we're not anticipating the level of traffic to previous levels. Anecdotally, I would say the levels of traffic in an urban area like Watford are definitely very close to previous levels now. I don't know what the case is in more the rural ones, but certainly in the more urban areas, they very much are so, as people are still straying away from public transport. That was the first two questions. The other was more concerning. I know there's been a seminar on at the same time as this meeting, which is slightly unfortunate because I had to make a choice as which one to go to. But my local paper, and I dare say you may even have seen it, Ralph, the headlines: alarmers COVID-19 cases rise, outbreak linked to bars, with various quotes from Jim, which doesn't say it's linked to bars. That's the headline from the paper for you. But in particular about spikes in Hertsmere and younger people in pubs and clubs and travelling in vehicles. Is there any commentary that, when you see headlines like that, and you see it on the newsstands, it starts to worry people. And it mentions Hemel Hempstead in particular, and indeed I had a neighbour yesterday. Is Hemel Hempstead going to be closed down? One of my family member lives there. What are they going to do? Type thing. I suppose it's a matter of media coverage, but also communications and how we handle it. Obviously, we can't force local newspapers to, or indeed national newspapers for that matter, to be totally 100% on the ball and accurate and not put scare headlines. But as I understand, although there has been rises in Hertsmere and there's been rises in Hemel, and they're being looked at closely, we're not in a situation that we have had in other major cities. Perhaps just some comments on that. Yeah, both the first two are going to be clarified at the Highways panel. More than happy to deal with it there. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Stephen. I'll come back to your last point. Alex, you mentioned the fact that there were certain subject matters that were going to go to other panels. I'm not sure that specific one is one of them, but I think it's appropriate that that detailed question in relation to high streets and so forth should go to the Highways panel, because I'm not sure we're going to be able to answer those questions in this panel.
Yes, just to clarify, and certainly maybe something we need to think about going forward, but certainly my understanding is that each cabinet panel will be having an item on COVID related activity in the next in this current cycle. Quite whether those indicators and therefore what specific questions you had, Stephen, as to whether they will necessarily be in the papers, but nonetheless there will be a discussion, certainly at Highways, I understand it, around kind of Highways related COVID issues at the next cabinet panel.
Okay, thanks very much. I think, Stephen, in relation to...
It's the paragraph 7. If 7.4 is going to Highways panel, we can deal with it there, and that's the appropriate place for it. That's fine.
I think you're right. I think in respect of your last point, I think David Williams has indicated that he would be able to give some commentary on your comments.
So yes, I'm more than happy, Ralph, just to make a couple of observations about the COVID situation and the performance across a couple of areas. First, it's probably worth saying that we have engaged with the key local press outlets in Hertfordshire, so printed press and also the BBC and our local democracy reporter, just to frame how some of the key issues in relation to how COVID outbreaks in particular are reported. I haven't seen the Watford Observer recent coverage, Stephen, but I'm obviously a little bit concerned if it's giving the impression of being, slightly sensationalist. But we will continue that ongoing dialogue with the press to make sure that things are reported appropriately and accurately. In relation to Dacorum and Hertsmere, council leaders do get the daily situation report that's circulated, and I don't know if Sarah's shared that with you in Three Rivers. Okay, yes. So it's probably just worth saying that in relation to both the Tring and Berkhamsted area of Dacorum in particular, and then in relation to Hertsmere, there is effectively something of an outbreak and a cause of concern in relation to either current or former sixth formers at 2 schools. Some of that associated, I suspect, with post A-level result celebrations. And so we have seen a bit of a spike in those 2 areas. A lot of work has been put into local track and trace and encouraging people to self-isolate. Some very clear messaging has gone out. I know there was a meeting, presumably Andrew Williams may have been involved, that Terry Duris and that Tim Hutchins and Jim had with Dacorum Borough Council earlier in the week. So yes, there are those 2 spikes. They're understood. There's some really appropriate messages being given. And so hopefully you and Sarah and the leaders in those areas are assured in terms of the work that's going on in order to address those very local outbreaks. Just for others on the call, they should appreciate that we do have a local outbreak engagement group, which is made up of the leaders of the 11 local authorities in Hertfordshire and the Police and Crime Commissioner. And we're meeting bi-weekly at the moment to consider COVID-related issues. And that's proved to be a really good forum in terms of understanding and in terms of ensuring that the right information is passing between public health, environmental health officers and the respective councils.
Thank you, David. Martin, you've indicated that you can address some of the questions on traffic.
Just one comment. The monitoring of volumes. Yes, it may seem a bit speculative, and it may run counter to our personal experience in some cases when we're sitting in traffic jams. But that is the view we're still taking. That there is going to be slightly less of volume overall once we come out of this and things approach a new normal than we've experienced before. Probably not 22% down, but still down. The only anecdotal example I'd give, I mean, there are 6,000 or so county council staff not travelling at peak times now. So one would expect, just on that basis alone, for there to be a slight reduction. But we highlight it here simply because we do want to see whether that is a long-term trend going forward.
Thank you, Martin. I think we've probably given this a good airing, and we need to get on to some of the other subjects before we run out of our time slot.
Can we record our thanks to all those many teams across the county council who have worked so hard through this period? I'm not sure we've done that from the panel because we haven't met, but I think it would be very appropriate.
I think that's a very appropriate thing to do. I'm going to suggest that we look at the recommendation on the order sheet and perhaps add a second one, which is in line with your suggestion that we thank all those who have put their effort into sustaining services that are being provided to the residents of Hertfordshire. And the third one, just recording the fact that we're going to pass on one or two of the issues that have been raised to the various panels. And I'm sure the minutes record which ones we said, and they can be put into the recommendation to Cabinet. So can I ask everyone to, in the chat line, indicate whether they are in favour or against or abstain from those three recommendations? I think from the indication I can see before I'm even told, that looks like a unanimous approval. So I'll move on to item 8, which is the update on central government devolution agenda. And I think Ed Knowles is in the room and will be providing a commentary on the paper.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, Chairman and members of the panel. This paper updates Cabinet panel on recent developments in respect to the government's devolution agenda. It highlights the direction of government policy, including recent ministerial announcements in advance of the forthcoming devolution and local recovery white paper. It also summarises the activity that's taken place to explore potential implications of structural reform for Hertfordshire, specifically an options appraisal commissioned from PricewaterhouseCoopers. Section 4 of the report makes reference to the history of devolution discussions, including a paper to this committee way back in March 2016. And the public statements on the part of the government articulating its current intentions around devolution and the role devolution can play in terms of both levelling up and more recently recovery. Section 4.4 notes the statement made by Simon Clarke, Minister of State for Regional Growth and Local Government at the LGA conference at the beginning of July, where Simon Clarke made reference to the government's intention to see structural change in local government and specifically the prospect of more mayors and more unitary councils. The report goes on to note that many councils across the country are now publicly expressing their interest in pursuing structural reform and makes reference to the statement by Councillor David Williams at our own full council on the 21st of July. Section 5 covers Hertfordshire's initial analysis report, as mentioned, commissioned from PricewaterhouseCoopers, which outlines the drivers for change and the potential for structural reform to support the delivery of the county's place-based outcomes. The report considers initially 2 potential options for structural reform: the creation of a single unitary for the county, or the creation of 2 unitary councils, one southwest, the other north and east. The report provides analysis as to how these options might satisfy what we understand to be MHCLG's framework for structural reform. Cabinet panel is recommended to note both the statements from government in respect of devolution and local government reform, and to note the findings of the initial options appraisal conducted. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Ed. Paul has indicated he'd like to ask a question.
I think actually David Williams was put his hand up before me, so I think you should probably.
My IT is not showing me the list of people who have put their hands up. Only one person and several behind. So I have indicated if you can put it in the chat as well, it would help me. So David, would you like to start off or kick off on the discussion?
Yeah, thanks, Ralph. And I'll see if I can be a mind reader and anticipate Paul's question. No, I just wanted to add a little bit of colour to what is in the report and what Ed has shared with us, and particularly to use the September policy cycle as an opportunity to air this issue, because we haven't had an opportunity to do that to date. But if I look back to the end of last year, those of you who follow these things closely may have seen that both in particular the Secretary of State, Robert Jenrick, but also the Chancellor then at that time, Sajid Javid, at the Conservative Party conference in October, made very clear that they expected to see some streamlining of local government and the creation of more unitary councils. We then had the October Queen's speech, which made very clear that the government wanted to bring forward a devolution white paper. We then had the Conservative manifesto going into the general election, again making very clear this issue in relation to devolution. We had the December Queen's speech, and as we went into the new year, we were looking at the prospect of the devolution white paper being brought forward in June. So against that background, I considered it appropriate in November to commission an authoritative look at what some of the key opportunities for us were in Hertfordshire. And just to elaborate a little bit on what Ed said, effectively there were 3 options in there. There was also the enhanced collaboration option, as well as a single unitary and a 2 unitary approach. PricewaterhouseCoopers, who many will recognise as one of the country's major consultants, have a very strong local government practice. We know that they had done some work with Oxfordshire back in 2016, 2017, I think. And then indeed, we had been involved in commissioning PricewaterhouseCoopers in 2019 to do some analysis on non-structural reform, i.e., what could be done across 2-tier areas without actually changing the governance. And so we were very familiar with the Pricewaterhouse team. Scott, as the resources director, obviously considered other consultancies that may act for us, that could have acted for us, so Grant Thornton, Ernst & Young, KPMG, but we concluded that PricewaterhouseCoopers were in a good position to advise us. So we commissioned that work. I think the cost of the work was something of the order of £42,000. So a very modest sum, both in relation to our total budget at Hertfordshire County Council, and indeed then the total budget for local government in Hertfordshire, where the numbers are respectively in revenue terms, 860 million in our case, and about £1 billion in total. And that work highlighted that there were some significant opportunities to make savings on behalf of our residents. Now, that work was concluded in February. We very quickly then went into, and our focus was on COVID. And also during that period, it became clear that the devolution white paper was not going to be published until the autumn. And so, you know, with our focus on COVID as our #1 priority, we concluded it wasn't appropriate to publish the report at that time. As we went through the summer, colleagues will be aware that the Growth Board, so the Growth Board consisting of all local authority leaders and also the Local Enterprise Partnership, were progressing discussions with MHCLG in terms of a growth deal, i.e. a degree of devolution to us. And inevitably the elephant was then very much in the room in terms of, well, what will the structure of local government in Hertfordshire be going forward? And so it was at that time that we discussed that as leaders, and the PwC report was brought into the public domain. I followed that up then with a statement at council in July. So in the period, as Ed has said, we've now had a series of announcements by the Secretary of State and by the local government minister. There seems to be a very clear commitment on the part of the government to wanting to see more devolution across the country, that unitary local governance is seen as being a requirement in order to bring that devolution about. But then in any case, it's, I think quite widely, the view is taken by the MHCLG ministers that there are significant opportunities to streamline local government in England. And I think it's perhaps just worth reflecting that of the 151 upper tier authorities in England, only 25 of them have the 2-tier arrangement. So 126 of the upper tier authorities in England are already unitary councils. And so there is more discussion and more debate that we need to have. I know that the districts and boroughs have engaged with their own advisors on this issue. We hopefully will see the white paper very soon. The white paper, I think, will be absolutely key in deciding what's best for Hertfordshire. Hopefully we don't have to wait too long for that. But in the meantime, you know, we do have a view that there is something like £100 million a year to be saved for the benefit of Hertfordshire taxpayers by pursuing a single unitary arrangement in Hertfordshire. And indeed, the work of the PwC did for us said that if we really stretched the transformation that could be delivered as part of this process, then those savings might be as much as £143 million a year. So, you know, this is an important issue that we can't ignore, both in terms of the local issue and the savings that we can deliver for our residents and the efficiencies that we can deliver. But also we do need to be very mindful of the national context. And candidly, I don't want Hertfordshire to be missing out on some of the devolution incentives and benefits that other parts of the country are already benefiting from, and which the further move towards unitary governance across 2-tier areas will provide to some of the other county authorities. So it's a very live issue, and we need to be very clear in terms of what we think is the best solution for Hertfordshire, but inevitably that discussion will crystallise as and when the white paper is published. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Paul, maybe if it's a statement or a question, whatever it might be, I'm sure your contribution will be valued.
Well, certainly there's a statement aspect to it. There is a fundamental question that kind of underpins that. And, starting point really for myself and indeed I believe my group is that what we understand that in principle the idea of reorganisation of local government is probably needed in England. But a fundamental question that really comes down the line is why now? Actually, it seems the most inappropriate time to be looking at this kind of reorganisation. I mean, Sharon, to an extent, stole a thunder of part of what I was going to ask in the previous question. You keep saying and you keep talking about £100 million saving, but actually not actually looking at how that money is actually saved. And it's actually saved by making people redundant. And we've just been talking about a massive spike in unemployment in Hertfordshire. And what you're talking about doing is making even more people unemployed. And actually, why are we then talking about reorganising local government in the midst of a really significant crisis that we're trying to deal with? We've seen the situation where we've got assistant directors being redirected to look at the detail of this reorganisation in the midst of a coronavirus pandemic when the council services and support and management are all really stretched. It just seems absolutely crazy that this wasn't shelved for 12, 18 months until we've actually got to a period where a new normal is starting to evolve. We've seen a situation where the Herts Growth Board, as far as I'm concerned, has had somewhat its legs chopped out from under it because the uncertainty that now resounds around Hertfordshire means, how are we going to progress the Herts Growth Board and the coordination between the councils when actually what we are discussing now is whether those councils will continue to exist. I have to ask whether Rob Bridges' disappearance, what I would consider an extraordinarily gifted and talented officer to a unitary authority elsewhere in the country, was actually precipitate, or finally the final kind of straw that precipitated that move might have been the discussion around reorganisation and the disappearance of the role that he currently takes on. There are so many different issues around this. Is the council leader aware that actually the result of this reorganisation might be that there are more councils created in Hertfordshire rather than less? We have a situation where at least 5 of the major towns in Hertfordshire are not parished and don't have town councils, and yet the structure that is apparently being proposed is that those areas would need those councils to be created. Or I've heard the idea of area committees, which sounds rather Stalinist in my view. The grand area committee for Welwyn Garden City that might be proposed. But we're still talking about having a bureaucracy at that level, and therefore a bureaucracy that needs a location and a site. It's effectively a town council. We're talking about having to create those. Are we really sure that PricewaterhouseCoopers have taken into account the substantive costs in creating multiple new councils, multiple new committees or area committees, or however you want to phrase it, and actually dealt with that appropriately in the detail? I don't believe they have, because it doesn't seem to refer to just how much that actually might cost and how long that might take. I just think that this is a proposal that has, in principle, potential merit, but a single unitary the size of Estonia creating a parliament that, Estonia has its own national parliament, and yet will be governing an area and a number of people equivalent to Hertfordshire. It just seems a little crazy to be discussing that in the midst of this pandemic. And I just think we ought to step back and reconsider whether this is the appropriate time to be doing this.
Thank you, Paul. Sharon, I think you were next.
Thank you, Chair, and I'm sure my views on this topic are very well known, but and I have to say how odd it is to be discussing this, the first opportunity to discuss this, at the County Council, which should have been on the 21st of July in full council, is at the Resources and Performance Panel. But there we are where we are. I'm going to make my comments anyway. First of all, I would say that this is nothing to do with devolution. This is centralisation, and we should be very clear about that. Creating mega councils the size of Northern Ireland or Estonia, as Paul pointed out, is not devolution. That is centralisation of services. And to be facing a situation, this is a national issue, and we don't know what the white paper is going to say yet. I look forward to seeing it. But to be facing potentially a situation in England where there are more councillors in London than there are in the whole of the rest of England put together seems a complete nonsense to me. I did want to talk about, Paul and David have mentioned the Hearts Growth Board work. That work was going really well. We had a very, very good, and we still have a very good package on the table to send to MHCLG for a devolution deal. We've all worked together on that. So you can imagine the response of district council leaders, and I'm talking about all of us across 10 districts in Hertfordshire. And in my experience, it is quite unique to have all 10 districts in Hertfordshire saying the same thing about anything, and about a big topic like this. We have a cross-party and cross-district agreement that we were really shocked when this report came out from PwC, and a statement from Councillor Williams saying that he'd already made his mind up that of the options in the PwC report, the single unitary was the right one for Hertfordshire. So that production of the PwC report, no consultation or discussion with districts not informed that the report had been commissioned in spite of the very close working we were doing on Hearts Growth Board. No consultation with Hearts residents about what they might think about the shape of local government in Hertfordshire. Maybe that's to come in the future, I hope so. And some very interesting flaws in the PwC work around the issues of council tax equalisation, around what Paul Zakowski has already mentioned, the cost of recreating another tier of local government in areas where we don't currently have parish and town councils. And as Paul said, the idea of having boards of the great and the good unelected instead of the democratic representation that people currently have in our districts fills me with horror. So I think that's all to be considered and discussed. So I think the absolute focus we should all be having at the moment is on recovery, not reorganisation. We know how complex local government reorganisation can be. I've seen it with my colleagues in Northamptonshire, where they had a reorganisation forced upon them. It takes a long time, it's very complicated, and from my perspective, we should all in this county be focused on recovery from COVID at the moment, not on the reorganisation, shifting deck chairs around in local government. And you know, this creation of mega councils, I do hope the government in the white paper will signify an upper limit, because there is 20 years of academic research that shows that making bigger councils doesn't necessarily mean they're more effective, more economical, or more efficient. So what it does show quite definitely is that it makes people feel more remote from the decision making about the places they live, about the lives they lead, and about the decisions that are taken that influence what happens in their day-to-day life. So nobody's pretending here that local government is perfect. It isn't. And we need to have a good debate in Hertfordshire about the way forward. But I hope that the district council's views will be taken on board and not just being dictated to. And I hope the views of Hertfordshire people, most importantly, will be taken on board about what they think about the shape of local government that makes decisions for their area. So I could go on at even more length, Chair, about this. I won't, because everybody on the committee needs a share of their voice today. But I do hope that the County Council will take a step back from having taken such a very dogmatic view on this, and listen to the districts and listen to the views of Hertfordshire people.
Thank you, Sharon. Tim, I think you had your hand up, and then Francis.
Thank you, Ralph. I really just wanted to come back to, I very much agree what Paul's just said and what Sharon's been said there. And yes, I would actually agree that local government does need to actually have a review done and completed. I do seriously question the timing of it at this moment as we're going through a pandemic, with the UK economy in sort of with the biggest reduction, fears of people in Hertfordshire, fears for the families being redundant and having money concerns. And here's local government who can actually support them going through this unnecessary review of its structure at the moment. But having said that, I'm coming from the residents and population of Hertfordshire side. What's going to be the consultation? How much of a say are the residents of Hertfordshire going to be having on this? I do remember sort of 25, 30 years ago, there was consultation done. So I just wonder if David Williams could explain that.
Tim, Francis? Your microphone is still off.
I'm so sorry. Yes, that's right. Okay. I'm really interested in waiting for the white paper, looking forward to it hugely. I note that the three previous speakers are all, as interests were declared at the beginning, are all what we in the trade call twin trackers, but actually are both district to borough and county councillors. And I was fascinated too that of the 13 people on this committee today, this panel today, 10 are twin trackers. They're on their district or borough council as well. And I mean, David Williams isn't, Ralph, you aren't, and I'm not. But it's interesting in that. And I'm fascinated as well that the comment keeps being, why now? Why now? I don't know why now. Let's wait and see the white paper. But if the country is in the financial difficulties as a consequence of the COVID pandemic, which I think we're all aware of, for colleagues to argue not now seems to me a bit confusing, given that the proposals coming forward, which I haven't prepared, but I've read them carefully, seems to be talking about £100 million saving per annum across Hertfordshire. And I think David Williams said, and he'll verify this, if we do a big stretch, it could be £140 million a year. And I was looking at the number of households in Hertfordshire, because what does that huge sum mean? I've gone online. There are less than 500,000 households in Hertfordshire, and not all of those will be paying council tax. That to me comes out 100 million divided by 500,000 households. We're talking about £200 per household per year on those figures, or with the big stretch going up to £300. Now, I'm not saying that would be a saving on the household expenditure. Maybe it would be a reinvestment in desperate resources. But to come back to the point, I'm fascinated that three previous speakers, all district and borough councillors as well, have made no reference to the huge potential savings that we are being advised could come forward. To me, that's critical for residents. Yep, let's make sure that everybody has a say. That will be spelt out in the white paper, I'm sure. And I really look forward to it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Francis. I'm not sure I see anyone else questions. So, Stephen, you indicated you'd like to speak.
Yes, thank you. And of course, Ralph and both Francis have previously been district councillors yourselves. I'm interested in this figure of the savings, because the report that cost £42,000 for Pricewater, anyone who knows a big consultancy firm, that's skim reading at the very least. And whilst there may or may not be savings, I'd certainly welcome the considerable work that will be required to substantiate these sort of figures that are now being suggested. £42,000 on a consultancy report gives you zero details. Indeed, the consultancy report from Pricewaterhouse had a number of factual errors, not least of which referring to Three Rivers being fully parished when of course it's not. And there were a number of others within that. And there's no costings, as has been alluded to elsewhere, about the need to set up alternative democratic arrangements, particularly in those areas which have charters. such as Watford and St Albans, where there is a requirement to have a directly elected authority as a result of those charters, and indeed probably elsewhere across Hertfordshire. Now, if savings are genuine in terms of less staff, which is what is implied, then that has another implication. But if the savings are, in fact, actually we can do all this centralised and less services, why doesn't government go the full hog and have a directly elected mayor for the whole of England, abolish all the councils, and have an election for once every 4 years? Because that's the route you would go down. Now, I'm not opposed to change, and I've been through local government change very early on in my local government career in that sense. And it may well be there are better ways of delivering the same or indeed better services, but it should not all be about financial savings. It's a question of how we can better deliver more services, particularly in an economic downturn when more people will require the support from local services in terms of what is being provided. But what does considerably worry me, which is why this push for a 1.2 million population mega council, is how those services are delivered locally. And only in this last week, I've had recent experiences where quite clearly, with all due respect to some officers, haven't a clue what is going on in the local areas. You know, agreeing to actually have a road closed at 7:30 on a Sunday morning so it can be dug up and ask the residents to move their cars on Sunday morning gives you the idea that they have not a clue what happens in some of our local communities. And to have that replicated in a mega area like this, I think fills me with horror. In terms of the other thing is the reliance in the Price Waterhouse that actually there are town and parish councils. There are probably, of the town and parish councils that already exist within Hertfordshire, those of a sufficient size to carry out any form of services of any real nature to local residents, probably number about 30. And it will also require, quite clearly, an awful lot of work from the Boundary Commission. But I'll come back to one more fundamental thing. Unfortunately, the County Council and its current form, and if this is replicated in a mega council, is made up primarily, I have to say, of older people of a particular nature who no longer have any full-time need for work, and it meets during the daytime. The district councils are evening meetings and have a far greater scope of people that actually either currently still work or have other employment and are actually able to engage in local politics and represent their residents far better. The last thing, whatever happens in terms of what the government is proposing, I'd like to see mega councils all made up of people that have to be, because of their very nature, retired and meet during the daytime. That, I think, is a fundamental disregard for democracy, and it means effectively we will exclude hundreds, if not thousands of people ever being able to stand for election to represent their local communities, if that's the route of what the white paper comes out with. Now, I hope it won't be so prescriptive than that, and each community can decide. And if we do end up with a 1, 2, or whatever, how many unitary councils in Hertfordshire, I, for one, personally want to see them having evening meetings so that we can be fully engaged with our communities and be much more representative than the county council currently is of our communities. Because, quite frankly, we really aren't as it currently stands when you look at the complexion of the county as it stands. But come back to Tim's point here. Now, previously, when elected mayors were brought forward, there was the requirement for referendums for them to be supported. Indeed, we had one in Hertfordshire, and it was supported. What's not clear, and I'd be interested to see what the white paper says, is what democratic engagement there will be. So if residents over a wide area say, yeah, fine, we like the idea of all these savings, we'll go with this and we'll vote for it, who am I to object to that? But if it's going to be centrally imposed from unelected bureaucrats in Whitehall, then I'm certainly against it. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Bob Deering.
Thank you, Ralph. Really very, very quick point from me. I agree with Francis. Obviously, we're all going to have to see how this unfolds and evolves. But just since the comment's been made during this discussion, I have to say I don't understand at all the reference to Estonia. Is it seriously being suggested that Estonia would be better if it was split into 10 different little tiny countries? Surely not. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. I'm going to invite David to come back in a moment, but I just wanted to make a couple of comments about the issue of the finance savings that have been projected, and somewhat, in some respects, work off the top of what Francis was suggesting, that this sum of money that's proposed, whatever it turns out to be, given the circumstances of the assessment, it will be significant. I can't say whether it will be 100 or 140 million, but it will be significant. Everybody seems to be assuming that we're going to be putting that into the bank somewhere, or handing it back to somebody. We could hand it back to the residents, but I think most of all, its use should be to reinvest in the very services that we are finding stretched at the moment, and that will require re-employment of people who are going to provide those services at the front line, and the loss of bureaucrats who are sitting currently in some of the council offices and perhaps are duplicating work across the board. So my perspective is somewhat different. We are going into a period of significant financial constraint. We have a spending review coming up in the autumn, which is not likely to be expansive, and we are going to be coming under significant pressures in terms of our ability to maintain existing services. So to turn down the opportunity of making a significant saving across the board and reinvesting that in new frontline services or supporting existing seemed to me to be a very relevant and purposeful thing to do. I see you've put your hand up again, Paul, but I'm going to allow David to come back first.
Ralph, Chair, thank you. Let me pick up a couple of points. I think in terms of, why now? When the white paper is published, it's going to be the devolution and local recovery white paper. And there is a real focus in terms of getting, to quote the minister, the British state match fit in order to deliver a recovery that's appropriate for the country. And part of that relates to local government. And, we should ask ourselves, is Hertfordshire match fit at the moment? Are there opportunities to reduce complexity? We were talking earlier about the sustainability strategy, and it transpires there are 11 sustainability and climate change strategies being developed across Hertfordshire. Does that make sense for our residents? And in so many areas, that's repeated. So I think there's a real opportunity to reduce complexity, to make savings, and in that way focus on the recovery and focus on delivering growth again for our residents in Hertfordshire. I mentioned that in many respects, two-tier local government is a minority approach in England as a whole. There are only 25 county areas, whereas there are 126 unitary authorities around the country. Now, there's a very well-worn path and a lot of experience of local government reform, whether that be in Labour-controlled Durham, as it became a unitary council, Conservative Wiltshire, independent stroke, Lib Dem Cornwall. There are some excellent examples of how local government reform has been introduced, how the issues of empowering town and parish councils or area action partnerships or local boards, how those are being used effectively in order to secure and indeed improve on the local voice and how the local voice is heard as a result of moving away from the two-tier system. The other element to that, Stephen, I readily accept that holding our meetings during the day, like today, means that has certain implications for the sort of people who are able and willing to become councillors. Again, I point to there's lots of experience out there in terms of how other people have done that and how other people have improved the representation of their councils as they've made this move from two-tier to unitary local government. And we need to look and learn from other areas. If we are going to take this forward, whether it's a 2 unitary solution, a 3 unitary solution, or a single unitary solution, the mechanism for doing it is tried and tested. There is an expectation that you would have to get support from MHCLG to bring a case forward. That case then, when it goes forward, yes, needs to look at the numbers in detail, and also needs to demonstrate a good level of public support, of local support for a particular proposal. So that's something that would need to be factored in and would obviously be reflected on by the officials and the Secretary of State before arriving at a decision. From my personal perspective, when I look across Hertfordshire, I see that 90% of local government expenditure across Hertfordshire is already undertaken by the County Council. And I think it's important that we recognise that. From my personal perspective, I am very focused on the quality and the significance of our large people services. So adult social care and children's services are two of our crown jewels, for want of a better description, in Hertfordshire. You don't get many Jenny Coleses or Ian McBeasts or Chris Badgers around the country and able to attract people of that calibre and management teams of the calibre that we've got. And so if we are going to move towards unitary local government, one of the things bearing very significantly in my mind is the concern about disaggregating those key services. Now, another piece of work has been conducted and published recently by the County Councils Network, which has looked at some of those issues about disaggregation. If there are people who feel that a 2 or 3 unitary solution intuitively for them is the right answer in Hertfordshire, I'd urge them to have a look at that report. Again, it's actually come from PwC, but it's been published and was commissioned by the County Councils Network, and just reflect on the importance of those key services. Equally, there are a few people on this call who attended the Waste Partnership conference earlier in the year. I think earlier this year. And I think we do need to recognise that whilst we've talked about curbside collections in particular, we still have a very fragmented approach to this. We haven't been able to pull that service together. And I would contend that having 6 or 7 different bodies doing curbside waste, and having some people in Hertfordshire who can recycle food using food caddies, and other people in Hertfordshire who have to pay to have their green bins collected, I don't consider a very satisfactory position, especially when there are millions of pounds that could be saved by taking a more common approach to the way that we deal with curbside collection. So, really important to appreciate that people have been down this route before. And if you're looking at Buckinghamshire, Cornwall, Durham, Wiltshire, Cheshire East, Herefordshire, Shropshire, there is lots of experience out there. There's lots of best practice, which I think we should feel fairly confident that this is an approach that we can deliver. If there is a very strong view that the answer is 2 unitaries or 3 unitaries, so be it. But I would need to be convinced of that, because at the moment, I want to ensure that the new council and we must always remember that as you move to unitary arrangements, you're looking at a new council being formed, that a new council would have the people services, the children's services and the adult care services of a standard and remaining as crown jewels of the way in which we support our residents in the county, and that's something that I particularly want to see happen. So hopefully that addresses some of the points that have been made, Ralph. As we recover from the pandemic, we need to be as fit as possible. We need to be in the best shape as possible. Having 11 chief executives, 11 planning authorities, 6 different waste collection providers, 11 sustainability strategies, etc., etc., etc. And I haven't really mentioned planning, but one of the great things about the Growth Board is that when you look at Hertfordshire without local planning authority boundaries, you come to some very different conclusions as to how Hertfordshire should grow. And we know there's a planning white paper that's just recently been published. There are going to be changes. I think some of those changes would be best suited to a unitary council as well. So thanks, Chair.
Thank you, David. Paul, you were looking to come back.
I think so, yeah. I mean, specifically, I just wanted to respond to Bob because when you look at Estonia actually has 79 local government entities, not 10. So, if he's actually seriously advocating that we might look at Estonia as a model, we should be looking at 79 local government entities in Hertfordshire, which I don't think is what is being proposed here. So, I think we're talking about a population size for one single council for the entirety of a population size of Estonia, and that's what I said. I think he ought to take that on board. Moving on to what some of the other people have said, actually, I think is quite useful. I'm interested and intrigued by David's assertion as to whether Hertfordshire is really match fit after 20 years of a Tory administration in Hertfordshire. I think it's quite revealing that perhaps he feels it isn't match fit after that 20 years. And I'm also really intrigued by the use of the word devolution in here. There's devolution powers from national government to local councils as they move to unitaries. But what we're seeing is a centralisation, as Sharon actually said, of power in a 1.2 million population single council. And it is it's the exact opposite of devolution. It's making democracy more remote from the local people. And I think anything that says that that isn't what would happen is just facile. It's just not credible. David mentioned 126 unitary authorities in the UK. Actually, how many of those are metro areas with a city mayor? Actually, how in a really fundamental level is that different from having two-tier local government? I don't see it as being different. But if he wants to go down that route and actually have a city mayor for Hertfordshire, of the ilk of the London mayor or Andy Burnham as a Manchester mayor, then I think he may get something different than what he was actually looking for. So it'd be really interesting to see whether a metro option is what we're actually looking for. I don't see that as a reorganisation of local government. It's just deck chair shuffling and changing the names. It's still 2 tiers of local government. And finally, the merging of services and the disaggregation of children's services and the disappearance of the crown jewels that David mentions. Well, SGM, Stephen mentioned that merging of services region-wide or even nationally might give an even better shine on those crown jewels. So why isn't that being considered? Why are we sticking with the Hertfordshire model for adult and children's services? Maybe a East of England regional model might be a more appropriate way of saving even more money. Because if money is the ultimate object here, then actually that's the end product of that particular direction of travel. So I just wanted to come back on those particular points, but most specifically the Estonia one, because actually Estonia does have local government, and it took me literally 30 seconds on Wikipedia to find that out.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you for your contribution. Clearly there is, this was intended to be the opening of the debate on this subject, and there's going to be some clear need to continue that debate through the autumn, particularly when the white paper comes out and we understand exactly the direction of travel from travel from central government and what their expectations are. It's been a useful exposure of the arguments on both sides, and I'm going to just ask everyone if they would.
Chairman.
Yes.
Chairman, may we have our votes recorded on this item?
Yes,
please?
I think that's a very
so
good.
Important to some of us.
Yep, I think that's a very good point, Sharon. I think that's no problem at all. I was going to potentially suggest that myself. So. Could you indicate in the chat function whether you support the recommendations, which are to note the statements from the government in respect of devolution and local government reform, and note the findings of the initial options appraisal conducted in Hertfordshire? So please. I think I've seen enough going through that to indicate that there is a positive outcome to that vote. So subject to that being overturned, I'll move on to the final item on the agenda. Yes, just confirmation that that was agreed. That is the sale of land at Ascot Road, Watford, and this is being presented by Mike Evans. Mike.
Thank you, Chair. Hopefully this it'll be a lot less contentious. This is a parcel of surplus land that we've got in Watford, close to Croxley Green. We bought it originally back in 2009 to help us with the delivery of the Metropolitan Line extension, the MLX, but unfortunately that's not moving ahead now. So this is a surplus asset. The proposal is that we allow a sale to proceed with an adjoining developer called Cortland. Details are in the Part 2 paper. They are building on an adjoining site, which means there is the ability to achieve some what's called marriage value. That's both in terms of financial offer, because they can increase the density across the two sites, but also for the placemaking aspect as well. They can achieve a stronger design context. And the proposal is that we lease the land to Cortland as opposed to selling the freehold. The reason being is that we have a choice, I think, here. It's a good location. It's a good proposal in terms of its design. So we can take a strong income stream off this over the long term. But in addition to the long income stream, it creates an investment opportunity. So we could sell the investment opportunity in the open investment market if needs be. And that achieves a stronger capital value than a straightforward sale based on planning. So the proposal is that we enter into two leases, one for the build, and we take a long income stream off the back of that, or if members wanted to, they could sell that investment. But the second part of the lease is there is the possibility of a future MLX coming over the hill at some point in whatever form that would be. So with highways, we've identified an area of reserved land that we could call back from the developer that would help facilitate the delivery of a future transport initiative for that locality. So, and the developer's quite happy with that, because obviously that would be an important dimension to his asset as well. So highways are on board. The planning proposal is going through Watford Borough Council. Part of the conditions here was that we wanted to receive a positive pre-application feedback from Watford, which they have done. So the recommendation is that we enter into a long lease with a 250-year lease with Cortland Developments Limited, either to hold for income generation or to sell as an investment opportunity.
Thank you, Mike. Any questions on Mike on a part two, but on a part one basis? I'm just going to ask if there is anybody who needs to ask a question in relation to the part two paper. If not, then there is no need for us to go into part two. We've seen and read the paper, but if there's a question, then I will need to take it into part two. But please indicate if you have a part one or part two question. Paul. Paul. Microphone off.
I'm trying to turn it off.
You're on now.
There we go. Right. Yeah. No. It was just that we've consulted with local members in the area, and everyone seems to think that this is a bit of a no-brainer. We're very happy with it, and thank you for bringing it forward. And we think that this is a really good move forward. So yeah, no questions, no issues really.
Thank you very much. Stephen, did I notice you as a local member you wanted to speak?
Yeah, it's really on the MLX or non-MLX issue. Reading the report and obviously what the officers just said, I just be totally clear. As obviously this part of the land was acquired to facilitate that section of the MLX being completed, and as I understand it from what's been read out and what's in the report, and I appreciate it's probably very much a long shot, the original scheme that had permission and Secretary of State approval were to be miraculously funded again, this sale, or rather lease, would not preclude that going ahead in its entirety, and it wouldn't preclude an alternative such as a tram link type scheme. I understand. I appreciate you may not be able to say any of this in part one in terms of the answers, but it's alluded to in the report, which is in part one. There have been discussions with planners at Watford Borough. I just want to be absolutely sure that we aren't causing ourselves 10 years, 20 years down the line, when the government might be in a better position to decide actually public transport does need this sort of funding, we do need the link in there, that we haven't caused a problem that stops it going ahead.
Perfectly relevant, Stephen. Mike, could you address that?
Yeah, no, it's been an important dimension in the negotiations. So our highways colleagues have been involved in this to understand the extent of land that we can call back that would facilitate whatever form of future MLX or whatever transport initiative, be it tram or whatever. So there's sufficient land to impose that, and also built in within the heads of terms. The developer is reinforcing or beefing up effectively the foundations of a car park. So we could put an extra deck or two onto the proposed car parking area that would aid a future transport initiative as well. So it's future proofing the car parking requirement, but also the space requirement as well.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you for allowing me to speak so many times this morning.
Okay. Anybody else wish to ask a question? Can I take it that I've not seen anybody indicating that they have a part two question? So I'm going to take that as a note that we do not need to move into part two, and we remain in part one. And the recommendations, which are under 3.1. There are three there. There's no amendments to them. I'm not intending to read them all out. But are we happy to agree to those as the recommendations of the Cabinet Panel? Please indicate in the chat line, please. I think that's agreed. Mike, you can commence your final negotiations. Thank you all. It's been a lengthy meeting, but it's been a very interesting and wide-ranging discussion on various points. Thank you all for your indulgence in terms of the overrun of 15 or 13 minutes. But I meet you all again at the next resources and performance panel. Thank you.
Thank you. And